Story 1. The world is fast and full of hidden dangers, which is why parents teach their sons and daughters from an early age not to trust strangers, not to get into unfamiliar cars, and never to go anywhere with people they don't know, no matter what they might say. Unfortunately, those with ill intentions often take advantage not only of the trust of the naive, but also of the vulnerable situations in which some adults find themselves. Mia Stephen, a young medical student, attended a party with her friends. She had a great time, enjoying the evening and the company of those around her. Everything seemed normal, and no one could have predicted what was to come. Tragically, Mia never returned home. Her disappearance mobilized the entire city, as people came together in the hope of finding her alive and unharmed. However, those hopes were shattered when a grim discovery was made in a nearby forest, something so shocking that even the most seasoned investigators struggled to process what they had found. Mia Stephen was born on January 15, 2000, in Aalborg, a large port city in northwestern Denmark. She was the youngest in a loving and close-knit family. She spent her childhood and teenage years in this cozy town known for its low crime rate and sense of safety. Mia excelled in school, showing a natural talent for subjects like chemistry and biology. Her teachers considered her a gifted student and were confident that she would achieve great things. Even as a teenager, Mia knew she wanted to pursue a career in medicine. She was deeply compassionate and attentive, always eager to help those around her. Mia was known for her bright and friendly personality, which made her popular among her peers. She was surrounded by a large circle of friends and was cherished for her warmth and approachability. Her striking appearance and graceful demeanor also attracted attention. She began modeling while still in school, appearing in various campaigns and catching the admiration of many. Wherever she went, Mia stood out, and she often had admirers vying for her attention. After finishing school, Mia fulfilled her goal of enrolling in the medical program at Aalborg University, one of the most prestigious institutions in Denmark. Alongside her studies, she continued modeling, working on commercials and fashion catalogs. Despite her accomplishments and growing independence, Mia still lived at home with her parents, maintaining a strong bond with her family. When the COVID-19 pandemic swept across the world, Mia was in her second year of university. The lockdowns and restrictions brought significant changes to her life. Classes moved online, and her in-person interactions with friends were replaced by social media, phone calls, and video chats. For a lively, outgoing, and sociable young woman, the lockdown period was a real challenge. That's why, when all restrictions were finally lifted in early February 2022, Mia Stephen eagerly prepared for her first party in years, a night that tragically turned out to be her last. On February 5, 2022, Denmark saw its first Saturday in nearly 2 years without pandemic-related social restrictions. Young people, especially college students, were thrilled to return to the nightlife they had missed so much. For them, it was a cause for celebration, and parties were planned across the country. Mia was especially excited about the evening. She called her friends, carefully coordinating the venue where they would meet to enjoy the long-awaited night out. At the same time, she sorted through her wardrobe, choosing an outfit that would highlight her figure and make her stand out. For her, this outing was more than just a trip to a bar. It was a symbol of returning to normal life. She had recently completed her second-to-last semester at university and wanted to celebrate this milestone with close friends she hadn't seen in a long time. She styled her hair, applied makeup, and wore a sleek black dress paired with high heels. To complete her look, she added a cropped leather jacket and a few elegant accessories. Despite the chilly February weather, she looked stunning. Her friends drove her to the venue, and Mia assumed they would take her home later, but plans shifted as the night went on. That evening, the bars and clubs along the city's central streets were packed with young people eager to make up for lost time. However, the streets themselves were mostly empty due to the biting cold. Mia and her friends started the night at one lively bar, where they spent several hours catching up and enjoying themselves. Later, they moved to a nearby pub, and an hour after that, they switched venues again. With each move from one bar to another, the group changed. Some friends left to go home, others ran into acquaintances and joined different crowds, and new friends came along to replace them. Naturally, the night was filled with laughter, dancing, and plenty of drinks. According to witnesses, Mia also consumed alcohol, but wasn't overly intoxicated. She danced, laughed, and chatted with everyone around her. By 3 a.m., the friends she had originally arrived with decided to leave. Mia, however, chose to stay, reassuring them that she would find her way home later. At the time, she was seen talking with an unfamiliar man who appeared to be interested in her. By 6 a.m., the club closed for the night. At that point, Mia was left with only one of her friends. The two stepped outside into the cold, dark morning. A biting wind blew through the empty streets, making the freezing weather even more unbearable. The two decided to head home by bus, but they needed to go in opposite directions. They parted ways, each heading to their respective bus stops. No one saw Mia alive again after that. Mia never returned home that night. At first, her parents didn't panic, assuming she might have gone to stay with one of her many friends. However, their concern grew when they realized her phone was going straight to voicemail, something very unlike her. By noon on February 6th, Mia's mother, unable to wait any longer, began calling her daughter's closest friends and classmates. One by one, they all said the same thing. They hadn't seen or heard from Mia since the night before, and they couldn't reach her either. Alarmed, her parents went to the local police station and filed a missing person report. They feared that since Mia was an adult and had gone to a party, law enforcement might delay their search by waiting the standard 24 hours. To their relief, the authorities took the case seriously and began investigating immediately. Detectives started by interviewing all the friends and acquaintances Mia had interacted with at the various bars that night. Witnesses confirmed that Mia had been drinking but wasn't overly intoxicated. They also provided a detailed description of what she was wearing: a sleek evening dress and a light jacket. Considering the cold February weather, investigators initially theorized she might have succumbed to the elements. However, they quickly ruled this out as no related reports had surfaced. Next, police reviewed security footage from the clubs Mia had visited. Unfortunately, the crowded venues made it almost impossible to track one specific individual. Although Mia appeared to be in good spirits and declined her friends' offers to drive her home, nothing else from the footage seemed suspicious. Attention soon turned to the mysterious man Mia had been seen dancing with that night. It was vital to locate and question him. Fortunately, identifying him wasn't difficult. He was a fellow student at Mia's university and an aspiring athlete with a promising future. He willingly came in for questioning and explained that he had left the bar around 5 a.m. and taken a taxi to his home across town. Police were able to verify his alibi through the taxi driver, who confirmed dropping him off at the stated location. Mia's family and friends insisted that she had no known enemies, conflicts, or anyone who might wish her harm. She had never used prohibited substances, had no involvement in criminal activity, and showed no signs of mental health issues. This led investigators to consider the possibility of a stalker or obsessive admirer, but no one in her circle had ever heard of such a person. To broaden the search, detectives examined footage from street surveillance cameras along Mia's route after she left the bar. She had exited the venue with a friend, and the two walked together for about 300 feet before stopping to say goodbye. From there, each headed toward their respective bus stops. During their review of the footage, investigators noticed something unusual: a dark car that appeared to be following Mia after she parted ways with her friend. After parting ways with her friend, Mia walked another 500 feet or so and stopped to wait for her bus. Unfortunately, it never arrived. It was early Sunday morning and the public transit schedule hadn't fully resumed following the lockdown, leaving Mia stranded. To make matters worse, her phone had died earlier in the night, a detail she only realized once she was outside, so she couldn't call for a ride or contact anyone for help. At 6 a.m., the streets were still dark and deserted. Mia, dressed in an evening gown, stood shivering at the bus stop, hoping her bus would show up soon. But as time dragged on, it became clear that it wasn't coming. At around 6:15 a.m., a black Volkswagen Golf pulled up near the stop. The driver spoke to Mia, likely offering her a ride, but she refused. The car drove off, leaving Mia alone once again. She remained at the bus stop, waiting in the freezing cold for over an hour. At 7:30 a.m., the same car returned and stopped at the bus stop. This time, the driver and Mia spoke for about 5 minutes. After what seemed to be a reluctant decision, she got into the car. It's believed that by then, the cold had taken such a toll on her that she decided to accept the stranger's offer. But the questions remained. Who owned the vehicle? Who was behind the wheel? And where did they take her? Investigators needed answers, and they needed them fast. The investigation was hindered by the poor quality of the surveillance footage. Despite their best efforts, experts could only identify the car's make and model. Neither the license plate nor the driver's face was discernible. To track the vehicle's movements, detectives reviewed recordings from other cameras in the area, and soon they caught a break. A few blocks from the bus stop, the Volkswagen Golf was spotted parking near a 24-hour convenience store. Fortunately, this store had a high-resolution camera that captured the car's license plate. Investigators immediately ran the plate through the vehicle registration database and identified the owner, a 37-year-old man named Thomas Thompson. Thompson lived not far from the nightlife district where Mia and her friends had been partying. Thompson shared his rented home with a 30-year-old roommate named Adam, who had previously come to the attention of the authorities. Both men had a record of minor offenses, including a scam where they impersonated police officers. Although they had only received fines for their past actions, this time the stakes were much higher. Both men were taken into custody for questioning. However, Adam was soon released after providing a solid alibi. He had left town to visit family the day before Mia disappeared and didn't return until February 8th. Investigators verified this information, and Adam was cleared of any suspicion. The investigation identified a primary suspect, Thomas Thompson. To build a clearer picture, detectives began by digging into his background. Born in June 1985 in the Danish city of Kolding, Thomas came from a modest family. During his teenage years, his parents sent him to live on a small farm in the southeastern countryside, owned by his grandparents. After graduating high school, Thomas joined the military, signing a contract and building a respectable career. He served in high-conflict areas around the world, eventually achieving the rank of sergeant. In 2015, he left the service, returned home, and enrolled in university, where he earned a degree in engineering. In recent years, Thomas had been renting a home in Aalborg and working as an engineer at a local industrial company. Colleagues and supervisors described him as a skilled, quiet, and diligent professional. However, he was notably private, rarely sharing personal details or forming close relationships at work. Thomas had a troubling legal history. On several occasions, he had been accused of domestic aggression, physical altercations, and causing injuries. Despite this, he managed to settle each case out of court. His former partners described him as short-tempered, aggressive, and alarmingly violent. In moments of rage, Thomas seemed to lose control, behaving in a way that left those around him terrified. Some even felt he might be capable of committing a serious crime. It was clear that Thomas had a dark side he struggled to manage. But did that mean he could have targeted Mia, harmed her, and possibly committed a crime against her? And most critically, where was Mia? Thomas, for his part, remained silent. In his car, investigators found a built-in GPS system. Hoping to trace his movements that night, they examined the data. They discovered that around 2 a.m. on February 6th, Thomas had tried to disable the GPS tracking. However, the attempt caused a malfunction, and instead of shutting off, the system began recording location data every 30 seconds. This error allowed detectives to reconstruct his movements in detail. According to the GPS, Thomas left his home at 2:45 a.m. and spent the next several hours driving around the city, seemingly looking for a target. At approximately 6 a.m., he stopped near the bus stop where Mia was waiting and spoke to her briefly. She declined his offer for a ride, and he drove off. For the next hour and a half, Thomas continued driving aimlessly through the streets before returning to the bus stop. By this time, Mia was visibly freezing and likely desperate. She reluctantly got into his car, seemingly feeling she had no other choice. The car left the city and passed through a few small nearby towns before turning onto an isolated wooded area. GPS data showed several brief stops close to one another, followed by a long pause where the car remained stationary for about an hour. An operations team with search dogs was dispatched to the site. Soon they discovered a broken phone belonging to Mia. Not far from it, they found a hair clip, followed by a torn necklace that she had been wearing that night. Strands of her long hair and fragments of her clothing were also found caught on the branches of nearby trees. The scene painted a grim picture. It seemed that Mia had tried to escape into the woods, tripping, losing items, and snagging herself on branches while someone relentlessly pursued her. However, the most horrifying discovery lay ahead. Several hundred feet deeper into the forest, the search dogs indicated areas of disturbed soil, suggesting something had recently been buried. Digging beneath about 3 feet of loose dirt, investigators uncovered human remains. The remains were dismembered into 231 fragments, some of which were scattered on the ground nearby. Identifying the victim was only possible through genetic testing. To the devastation of her loved ones, the remains were confirmed to belong to Mia. News of the grisly find quickly leaked to the press, forcing law enforcement to make a public statement. They assured the community that the dangerous perpetrator had been apprehended. Forensic examination revealed chilling details. Marks on the bones suggested the body had been dismembered using a tool resembling a power saw. Pieces of tissue showed evidence of being soaked in a chemical solution, possibly an attempt to dissolve them or eliminate traces of DNA. Due to the condition of the remains, determining the exact cause of death was difficult. However, medical examiners believed the likely cause was mechanical asphyxiation. Mia had likely been strangled, not with bare hands but with a rope or a thin strap. Blood stains were found in Thomas Thompson's car, even though they had been partially cleaned. DNA analysis confirmed the blood belonged to Mia. Additional blood traces were discovered in his home, particularly in the bathroom, where it appeared her remains had been dismembered. When confronted with the evidence, Thompson initially tried to explain his actions, claiming he had no harmful intentions and did not plan to harm anyone. He said he attempted to disable his car's GPS because he was being stalked by a corrupt police officer who was blackmailing him, although he could not provide a name or any proof of this claim. Thompson also described seeing a lightly dressed woman at the bus stop early that morning. He said he had stopped out of kindness to offer her a ride, but she refused. He claimed he then drove off to attend to other errands. About 90 minutes later, on his way back, he saw the same woman still at the stop, now visibly freezing. According to him, this time she accepted his offer for a ride. According to Thompson's account, the young woman was intoxicated, behaved flirtatiously, and allegedly offered intimacy as a form of gratitude for his help. He claimed they drove out of the city to a secluded area, where they engaged in consensual activity in his car. Thompson then alleged that during this encounter, Mia accidentally pulled on the car door handle, causing the door to swing open. He said she fell out, broke her neck, and died instantly. Panicked, he decided not to contact law enforcement and instead attempted to dispose of her body to protect himself. The story raised immediate doubts. Detectives pointed out several inconsistencies, particularly the scattered personal items and strands of Mia's hair found in the forest. When pressed further, Thompson altered his story, claiming that after their encounter, Mia began to sober up, accused him of aggressive behavior, and threatened to press charges. He said he tried to calm her down, but she became hysterical, fled the car, and ran into the woods. Thompson claimed he followed her, intending to bring her back to the car to drive her home, fearing she might freeze to death. He said that during the chase, she tripped, hit her head, and died on the spot. Thompson admitted to taking her body home, where he dismembered it in his bathroom and soaked the remains in chemicals, hoping they would dissolve entirely. However, after several hours, the process had no effect. The remains were still intact and now emitted a foul odor. Desperate, he packed the remains into bags, drove them to the forest, and buried them. He insisted the death was an accident, and that his only wrongdoing was attempting to conceal the evidence out of fear that no one would believe him. He maintained that he acted out of panic, not malice. Despite Thompson's shifting narratives, further searches at his property uncovered damning evidence. Behind his home, investigators found a makeshift burn pit partially covered with soil and debris. There, he had attempted to destroy blood-stained clothing, car floor mats, Mia's personal belongings, and her purse. While most items were heavily damaged, her purse remained mostly intact, including its thin strap, which bore Mia's blood and traces of her skin cells. Forensic experts confirmed this strap was the weapon used to strangle her. The prosecution successfully argued that Thompson had acted with premeditation and malicious intent. The evidence showed he had deliberately attempted to disable his car's GPS system, indicating he planned his actions in advance. Prosecutors portrayed him as a predator who went hunting that night, ultimately targeting an isolated and vulnerable young woman. Mia, cold and alone, became his ideal victim. While she initially refused his offer for a ride, her desperation led her to accept the second time he approached her. Thompson's attempt to destroy evidence and his inconsistent statements further undermined his claims of innocence. The jury concluded that he had deliberately lured Mia into his car with harmful intentions and later took steps to conceal his actions. Despite the evidence, however, the court's sentence was unexpectedly lenient, sparking widespread outrage. Many questioned how someone who had committed such heinous acts could receive anything less than the maximum punishment allowed by law. It's likely that once Mia was in the car, Thompson threatened her with a weapon and drove her to the secluded forest. There, she attempted to escape, but he caught up with her. Evidence suggests he assaulted her, and then used the strap of her purse to strangle her. Afterward, he took her body to his home, where he dismembered it and attempted to dissolve the remains in chemicals. Thompson's actions indicated that his crime was premeditated and carried out without remorse. For instance, on the same day he committed these horrific acts, he ordered pizza delivery to his house twice, and even went to a nearby store to buy candy. Witnesses from the neighborhood reported that he appeared completely calm, smiling and chatting with others, while at the same time, the remains of the young woman floated in his bathroom. Unfortunately, the court could not confirm evidence of an assault with intent due to the destruction of DNA by the chemical solution. Thompson himself claimed during interrogations that their encounter had been consensual. The investigation also uncovered Thompson's troubling history of voyeurism. He had been caught peeping into windows of various women's homes, watching them undress and even taking photographs. However, no charges were ever filed against him, and the victim's complaints were not acted upon. In June 2023, Thompson was found guilty of premeditated homicide and desecration of a body through dismemberment. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. However, under the law, he will be eligible for parole after just 10 years, and as history has shown, there's a strong chance he may be released. Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. Story 2. Teenage years are perhaps the most vulnerable period in a person's life. It's a time when individuals are no longer children, but not yet fully formed adults. They are still naive and carefree, but often keep secrets, sometimes out of fear or embarrassment. Sadly, an inability to share those struggles with a trusted parent or loved one can sometimes lead to tragedy. The case of Justice Garrett, who is just 16 and whose life was tragically cut short in 2018, has rocked the state of Florida. For her mother, it was a devastating revelation. She hadn't noticed or understood the nightmare her daughter had been enduring. Justice's story is one of a terrible secret she kept, fearing judgment. A silence that ultimately led to an unimaginable tragedy that ended her life. Justice Mary Garrett was born on March 19, 2002, and was the eldest of two daughters in the family of Danielle and Sebastian Garrett. She grew up alongside her younger sister, Jeanette, who was 10 years younger. Most of Justice's childhood and teenage years were spent in the small town of New Smyrna Beach, located in Volusia County, Florida. In 2016, Justices divorced and the sisters stayed with their mother. About a year later, Danielle met a man named Robert Kern, with whom she soon began a romantic relationship. By the fall of 2017, Danielle, along with her two daughters, moved to the tiny rural town of Sorrento, Florida, with a population of just over 1,000, and moved into Robert's home. Justice struggled the most with the move and found it difficult to adapt to the new environment. First, she deeply missed her close friends who remained in New Smyrna Beach. Second, as a high school student, she had to transfer schools in the middle of the academic year. Third, she didn't like her new home or her mother's partner. Despite her frustrations, Justice tried not to create problems and behaved respectfully. Known for her social, friendly, and humorous nature, Justice quickly made friends at her new school. She became especially close to a classmate named Rochelle, and the two were practically inseparable. Justice frequently stayed over at Rochelle's house, and the girls even listed each other as sisters on social media. On Friday, April 13, 2018, Justice overslept and missed the school bus. She hurriedly prepared for class and didn't have time for breakfast. That day, her younger sister was feeling unwell and stayed home, while her mother planned to take Jeanette to the hospital. Justice decided to take a public bus to school, which was only a couple of stops away. She packed her backpack, said goodbye to her mother, and left the house. That was the last time anyone saw Justice alive. When Justice didn't come home from school on time, Danielle wasn't alarmed. She assumed her daughter had gone to Rochelle's house after class, as she often did. By evening, Danielle believed that Justice had decided to stay overnight at her friend's house, something she had been doing frequently. Even the fact that Justice's phone was turned off didn't immediately concern her. However, on Saturday morning, Danielle received a call from Rochelle, who nervously asked if everything was okay with Justice. Danielle, feeling a sudden chill run down her spine, asked in a trembling voice if Justice hadn't stayed over at Rochelle's house. The response left her shocked. Rochelle revealed that she hadn't seen Justice since Thursday. Justice hadn't shown up for school on Friday, and her phone had been off for nearly 2 days. Danielle panicked. After several failed attempts to contact her daughter, she rushed to the local police station and filed a missing person report. The search for Justice began immediately. When officers learned that Justice had moved to the area only 6 months earlier, they initially assumed she might have traveled back to her old town to visit friends for the weekend. Teenagers at that age often leave home impulsively, whether in protest or for other reasons, so authorities considered it likely that she would resurface soon. However, Danielle insisted that her daughter would never do such a thing without letting her know. The first step was to determine Justice's circle of acquaintances and see if she had a boyfriend, any recent arguments, or other details that might help piece together the events of the day she was last seen. Justice hadn't taken any money with her, and all her belongings remained at home. Her phone became unreachable shortly after she left for school. Her social media accounts showed no activity since late Thursday night, and she hadn't responded to any calls or messages. None of her friends had any idea where she could be, as she hadn't contacted or reached out to anyone. According to her family and close friends, Justice didn't drink alcohol or experiment with prohibited substances. She wasn't in a relationship and had never been involved in serious romantic commitments. Justice didn't associate with negative influences, had no conflicts with others, and had never broken the law. Teachers at her school described her positively, and her peers generally saw her as kind, compassionate, and sweet. Police quickly checked all local crime reports, incidents, and traffic accidents throughout the area. They considered the possibility that she might have been involved in an accident and was unable to communicate. However, there were no records of her being involved in any such events. Using data from her phone, investigators were able to track her movements on the morning she disappeared. Around 7:30 a.m., Justice left her home and began walking toward the school. Approximately 15 minutes later, her movements became unusual. She stopped for a moment, then abruptly changed direction. Shortly afterward, her phone was turned off. Justice's disappearance sparked rumors and speculation throughout the town. In a community where little ever happened, any incident became the center of attention, quickly spreading through gossip and often embellished with falsehoods. For some locals, rumors were a form of entertainment, and they saw no harm in passing them along. While Justice's friends and many classmates genuinely wanted to help the investigation, others saw the situation as an opportunity to gain attention, boost their own importance, or even achieve a fleeting sense of notoriety. Several people claimed to have seen Justice Garrett in different parts of town. Some said she got into a mysterious black car with tinted windows. Others suggested she was walking with a group of nonconformist teens, and a few even speculated she had been recruited into a religious sect. These rumors seemed to come out of nowhere, and it was difficult for investigators to separate fact from fiction. As a result, every piece of information, no matter how implausible, had to be checked thoroughly. One student, a girl a grade above Justice, stood out with her behavior. She started an entire blog dedicated to Justice's disappearance, claiming the teen had run away with a secret boyfriend and was expecting his child. The girl was simply seeking attention and popularity at school, spreading sensationalized and entirely fabricated stories. Her actions led to disciplinary measures, and she was temporarily suspended from school during the investigation. Additionally, her social media accounts were deactivated for spreading false information. On April 17th, 4 days after Justice's disappearance, a man made a chilling call to the police. He reported finding something disturbing in a wooded area on the outskirts of DeLand. The man, an avid runner, often jogged along a secluded trail that wound through a park and into the forest. That morning, as he ventured deeper into the woods, he noticed a strong, unpleasant smell of decay. Initially, he assumed it was the carcass of a dead animal and thought about reporting it to the appropriate services to have it removed. However, his curiosity got the better of him, and he decided to investigate the source of the odor himself. The runner stepped off the trail and walked about 15 feet into the brush. There, he came across a gruesome sight, a heavily decomposed human body, disfigured beyond recognition. Judging by the long hair and remnants of clothing, it appeared to be a young woman. The man immediately called law enforcement and waited on the trail to ensure he didn't accidentally disturb potential evidence. When officers arrived, they conducted a thorough examination of the area and the remains. It became clear that this was the scene of a violent crime, and the victim was indeed a very young woman. Her clothing was torn and her undergarments were missing, indicating that the nature of the crime was likely of an intimate and aggressive nature. There were noticeable bite marks on the legs, likely from wild animals, but the most severe damage had been caused by a corrosive chemical. This substance had eroded the girl's face down to the bone and had also been poured over her chest, lower abdomen, and intimate areas. It was clear that the perpetrator had attempted not only to disfigure the victim, but also to eliminate any traces of DNA, a tactic that, as it turned out, was successful. From the start, investigators suspected that the body found in the woods belonged to the girl who had gone missing days earlier. However, due to the extensive chemical damage and decomposition, DNA testing was required for confirmation. Tragically, the Garrett family's worst fears were realized. Justice had been found dead. Her remains were discovered about a 30-minute drive from the town where she lived. Evidence suggested that she had been severely beaten before the crime, as her nose, cheekbone, and several ribs were broken. Due to the advanced state of decomposition, the exact cause of death could not be definitively determined, but it was presumed to be mechanical asphyxiation. A suspicious stranger, the man who discovered the remains, provided valuable information during his interview with police. He explained that he frequently ran along the same trail every other day. 2 days before finding the body, he had noticed a suspicious man emerging from the woods near the area where Justice's remains were later found. The witness couldn't provide a detailed description of the man, as he had only seen him briefly from behind and at a considerable distance. He described the individual as a white male, short in height, with a stocky build, wearing jeans and a black hoodie. The man quickly left the area after noticing that he wasn't alone and disappeared behind the trees. At the time, the runner found the encounter odd but didn't think much of it. There was no noticeable odor of decomposition that day, so he dismissed the interaction from his mind. However, after discovering the remains 2 days later, he recalled the strange man on the trail and reported the incident to authorities. Detectives immediately suspected that the stranger in the woods might have been the perpetrator responsible for the crime. It was possible he had returned to the scene to cover his tracks and destroy evidence. Experts determined that the corrosive substance used on the body was chlorine bleach. The combination of the chemical and the area's humid climate accelerated decomposition, rendering the remains unrecognizable. The jogger, however, was ruled out as a suspect after successfully passing a polygraph test and providing a solid alibi for the day Justice disappeared. According to Justice's mother, her daughter had planned to take a public bus to school that morning. However, surveillance footage from street cameras revealed that Justice never approached the bus stop. Adding to the mystery, a neighbor mentioned seeing Justice get into a car belonging to her stepfather, Robert. This revelation completely changed the direction of the investigation, as detectives now had to re-interview the teenager's parents to determine why they hadn't been truthful. Danielle quickly confessed, explaining that her partner, Robert Kern, had recently been temporarily stripped of his driver's license. However, since her daughter was running late that morning, he agreed to give her a ride. Danielle had withheld this information to avoid causing trouble for Robert. At the time of the initial interview, she believed Justice was still alive and would return home soon. Detectives immediately requested footage from surveillance cameras near the school to verify the stepfather's story. However, the recordings revealed that Robert had not dropped Justice off at school or anywhere nearby. His car was not captured on any cameras along the route to the school. So where had they gone? With this new information, it became clear that Robert was likely the last person to see Justice alive. When questioned again, Robert admitted to driving Justice that morning, despite his suspended license. According to him, Justice had begged him to take her not to school, but to a neighboring town, DeLand, where she supposedly had a planned meeting with a secret boyfriend. Robert claimed he didn't know the name of the person she was meeting and had initially refused to take her there. However, he eventually gave in to her pleas, hoping to improve their strained relationship. Justice allegedly made him promise not to tell her mother about this outing. She assured him that she would return on her own later in the day and mentioned that being Friday, she planned to stay overnight at a friend's house. Robert agreed, as he didn't see anything unusual or concerning about the situation. This revelation introduced a new suspect into the case, a possible secret boyfriend. Investigators needed to identify and locate him as soon as possible. He could either be involved in Justice's disappearance or, at the very least, be the last person to have seen her alive. To begin the search, law enforcement decided to review Justice's contacts and activity on social media. Since her phone had not been recovered, detectives seized her laptop, and what they discovered raised more questions. Justice had multiple accounts across various social platforms, where she frequently interacted with both real-life and online friends. However, no romantic conversations or evidence of a boyfriend were found. One account, however, stood out as particularly unusual and suspicious. This profile quickly became the focus of investigators as they worked to uncover its owner and its potential connection to Justice's disappearance. A young man named Kevin had been showing an unusual amount of interest in Justice Garrett in recent months. He messaged her daily, liked her posts, and left compliments under her photos. However, Justice seemed uninterested. She rarely replied to him, often ignored his messages, and showed no desire to maintain contact. Friends of Justice later confirmed that she had mentioned a persistent admirer who constantly messaged her on social media, but she found him annoying rather than flattering. From Kevin's profile, he appeared to be 2 years older than Justice and lived in the same town. His page featured only a few photos showing an athletic and attractive young man. However, none of Justice's friends or family had ever seen him in person. Soon, it was discovered that the account was fake, and the photos had been taken from the internet. Specialists quickly accessed the account and traced its creation details. The investigation revealed that the account did not belong to a teenager at all, but was instead tied to an adult man, Robert Kern. Justice's stepfather was called back for questioning. Detectives asked why he had created a fake account to interact with his stepdaughter, and why he hadn't disclosed this earlier. Robert appeared surprised that investigators had uncovered his connection to the account, but quickly composed himself and offered an explanation. According to him, he had set up the account to boost Justice's self-esteem, claiming that as the new girl in town and at school, she might appreciate receiving compliments from a seemingly attractive young man. While it was true that Justice was new to the area, as mentioned earlier, she had quickly integrated into her school community and made many friends. However, those close to her had recently noticed changes in her behavior. The once cheerful and carefree teenager had become increasingly tense and nervous. She didn't share the reasons for this shift with anyone, but she frequently stayed over at her best friend Rochelle's house. In fact, Justice spent so much time there that it was as if she had moved in, though she never confided in Rochelle about what was troubling her. According to Rochelle, Justice's stepfather had come to her house several times to pick Justice up and bring her home. Each time, Justice seemed visibly nervous and would try to avoid leaving with him. She would call her mother, begging to stay a few more nights at Rochelle's, promising to complete all her chores and focus on schoolwork in exchange. Danielle often gave in to these requests. Robert and Justice had reportedly had a strained relationship from the start, something well known among her friends. However, Justice never accused him of aggression or inappropriate behavior. Likewise, those around her, including her mother, had never observed anything that seemed out of line in Robert's interactions with his stepdaughter. With mounting suspicion surrounding him, Robert Kern became the main and only suspect in the investigation into Justice's tragic death. Police detained him for further questioning while simultaneously delving into his past and lifestyle. Robert, 43 years old, had a long history of legal trouble, including convictions for burglary, possession of prohibited substances, and physical altercations. His criminal record had made it nearly impossible for him to secure stable employment. He occasionally worked illegally as a carpenter at a local sawmill, taking on odd jobs to make ends meet. Detectives were now focused on connecting the dots between Robert's questionable past, his behavior toward Justice, and the events that led to the horrific crime. Robert had carefully concealed his past from everyone around him, including Danielle, who had no idea she was living with a man with a criminal history. When investigators revealed the truth about him, she was stunned and finally spoke up. Danielle admitted that Robert had volunteered to drive Justice to school that day, even though Justice had protested against it. When Justice didn't return home, Danielle grew worried, but Robert reassured her that Justice was spending the night at her friend Rochelle's house. He even forbade her from calling the police or reaching out to Rochelle. Investigators examined Robert's devices and discovered that in the months leading up to Justice's disappearance, he had been frequently searching online for information about substances that could render a person unconscious or unable to move. He had also looked into purchasing such substances on the dark web, and it appeared he had successfully done so. But that wasn't all. Robert had also researched ways to eliminate DNA evidence from a body, focusing on household chemicals, including bleach and disinfectants. He had even reviewed satellite maps of nearby wooded areas, particularly the outskirts of DeLand, where Justice's body was later found. It became clear that Robert had been meticulously planning for months to carry out his crime, dispose of the body, and erase all traces of evidence. As for his motive, it seemed evident from the beginning. Robert had developed an inappropriate obsession with Justice, and realized that the only way to act on his twisted desires was through force. To avoid facing legal consequences for his actions, he had decided to eliminate her entirely. The final doubts about Robert's involvement were dispelled when investigators reviewed his phone's geolocation data from that day. He had driven with Justice away from their home in the direction of her school, but then abruptly turned toward a remote area and stopped. It was likely at this moment that Robert used a chemical, possibly chloroform, to incapacitate Justice and turned off her phone. However, he failed to deactivate his own device, which recorded his movements. Afterward, Robert's vehicle was tracked heading toward DeLand, where it stopped for approximately an hour. This time frame would have given him enough time to assault Justice, physically harm her, take her life by strangulation, and hide her body in the woods. On that day, he had with him a small bottle of a chlorine-based substance, which he poured over her face and other areas to destroy potential evidence. However, Robert grew anxious, fearing he might have left traces behind. 2 days later, he returned to the scene with a large container of bleach. He then poured the chemical extensively over Justice's head, chest, and lower body in a final attempt to destroy any remaining evidence linking him to the crime. That morning, when the assailant returned to the crime scene for a second time, he was spotted by the jogger who later discovered Justice's body and reported it to the police. As for Kern's alibi, it quickly fell apart. Working unofficially at a local sawmill, he had asked two colleagues to claim he arrived on time that day, even though he was nearly 2 hours late. Under further questioning, both witnesses admitted the truth after being warned they could face charges for perjury and concealing evidence related to a violent crime. Robert Kern denied all charges, but the evidence against him was overwhelming, leading the case to trial. Witness testimony painted a picture of Justice living in constant fear during the last few months of her life, avoiding home as much as possible. However, she never shared her concerns, not even with her mother. Danielle, blinded by her affection for her new partner, failed to notice the situation unfolding around her and never questioned Kern about his past. Prosecutors systematically dismantled Kern's claims, proving he had meticulously planned this heinous act, fully intending to ensure Justice wouldn't survive. Moss and soil samples from the site where Justice's body was found were matched to particles discovered on Kern's car mats, further linking him to the crime scene. However, the allegations of an intimate assault could not be conclusively proven, as all DNA evidence and tissue samples had been destroyed by the corrosive chemical Kern used, which had eaten away at the victim's remains down to the bone. In August 2022, nearly 2.5 years after the crime, Kern was convicted of premeditated violent murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring he will never be released. Story 3. In March 2023, amidst the regular routines of family life, the seemingly stable world of the Craig family from Colorado took an unexpected and devastating turn. Their marriage and careers, once thought to exemplify stability, began unraveling as buried secrets and a loss of trust surfaced. While friends and relatives struggled to make sense of the situation, new revelations raised even more questions. What truly happened behind closed doors in this outwardly perfect family? Angela was rushed to the hospital on March 15, 2023, around 11 a.m., suffering from severe headaches, dizziness, and nausea. This marked her third hospitalization in just 10 days. But this time, the situation was far more alarming. Medical staff placed her on life support, fighting to stabilize her condition, which was deteriorating at an alarming rate. Her family, including her husband, James, was in shock, unable to comprehend the sudden and rapid decline in her health. Born on April 15, 1975 in Dodge City, Angela had been a central figure in her family and community from an early age. Raised in a large family with 10 siblings, she developed a love for animals despite her allergies. Her interests ranged from reading to woodworking, and her natural charisma and sociable nature endeared her to friends and acquaintances alike. Angela found success as an interior designer, known for creating warm and inviting spaces, and she had a passion for genealogy, helping people reconnect with long-lost relatives. On December 18, 1999, Angela married James Craig, who later became a dentist. In 2006, James graduated from the University of Missouri-Kansas City and became active in international dental programs. Together, they built a life in Colorado, where James established his dental practice in Aurora. The couple had 6 children, and despite her busy life, Angela maintained close relationships with her siblings, particularly her sister Toni, with whom she spoke daily. Angela's life seemed picture perfect. She was deeply involved in church activities, directed a choir, and led youth programs. However, the sudden health issues she experienced in March 2023 shocked everyone. Just a week earlier, she had complained of a headache, but the symptoms quickly subsided, leaving no cause for concern. Neither her family nor the doctors could explain why her condition was now deteriorating so rapidly. Meanwhile, James remained by her side, attentive and caring as always. At 2 p.m. that same day, Angela suffered a severe episode that left her loved ones filled with helplessness and fear. The medical team worked tirelessly to save her, but the cause of her condition remained a mystery, adding to the already mounting tension and distress. When Angela became unresponsive, doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize her, but the situation spiraled out of control. The stroke she suffered on March 15, 2023, marked a critical turning point. Her brother, who had driven her to the hospital that day, later recounted that by the time they arrived, she was already in a severe condition. Her symptoms had worsened: intense dizziness, unbearable abdominal pain, and persistent nausea. This was her third visit to a medical facility in just 10 days, but this time the circumstances appeared dire. Angela's first hospitalization had occurred on March 6th, just one day after she returned from a trip to visit her sister Tony in Utah. At the time, doctors deemed her symptoms minor, and she was discharged after an evaluation. However, on March 9th, she sought medical help again. Her husband, James, a seasoned dentist with years of experience, who had always been a supportive presence during difficult times, was deeply concerned. He sought advice from the wife of his friend and colleague, Ryan Redfern, who held a doctorate in medicine. In the days that followed, Ryan and his wife remained actively involved, checking in on Angela's condition. They offered their support and shared insights about potential causes of her symptoms, suggesting additional tests and consultations. James maintained regular communication with them, sharing updates and results. Among the tests conducted were MRIs, ultrasounds, blood work, and CT scans of various areas of Angela's body. Despite these efforts, all results came back within normal ranges. The only consistent anomaly was Angela's abnormally low blood pressure, even with intravenous fluid therapy. By the time Angela suffered a stroke on March 15th, James fully grasped the gravity of the situation. He shared the devastating news with Ryan's wife, sending her photos from the hospital room. The images showed Angela surrounded by medical equipment, under constant observation by a team of specialists. Yet, even then, the doctors struggled to identify a definitive diagnosis, leaving everyone involved feeling helpless and overwhelmed. The morning of March 15th brought a frantic phone call that would heighten James's anxiety even further. Angela's brother informed him that he was driving her to the hospital because her condition had deteriorated dramatically. At the time, James was at his clinic attending to patients. Upon hearing the news, he immediately left to be by her side. Realizing the conventional diagnostic methods were failing, James decided to consult Ryan's wife once again, desperate for answers as Angela's health continued to decline at an alarming pace. The events leading up to March 15, 2023, were tense and unsettling. On March 9th, after being admitted to the hospital for a second time, Angela was kept overnight for observation. Despite their hopes that her condition would improve, doctors were unable to determine the cause of her symptoms. While the test results consistently came back normal, the growing concern among her family and the medical staff painted a troubling picture. Throughout these developments, Ryan and his wife continued to play a significant role. Ryan, a longtime friend and financial partner of James, had supported him during challenging times before, including helping save James' dental practice during a financial crisis in 2021. This time, their assistance was just as crucial as Angela's life now hung in the balance, and the reasons for her suffering remained an enigma. Meanwhile, Caitlin, the new office manager at James' dental clinic, couldn't shake the feeling that something unusual was happening with her boss. Her suspicions began to deepen following several events in the days leading up to March 15th, when Angela's condition became critical. Conversations with Ryan, James' trusted friend, eventually helped her observations fall into place, revealing a disturbing pattern. It all started on March 6th. That evening, Caitlin was working late when James unexpectedly appeared at the clinic. He didn't have any patients scheduled, and his behavior seemed out of the ordinary. Instead of working at his computer in his office, James went into one of the exam rooms and used the computer there. While Caitlin found this odd, she didn't think much of it at the time. A few days later, on March 13th, a package arrived at the clinic. James had specifically instructed Caitlin to personally receive it and emphasized that no one else should open it. However, when she went to collect the delivery, she discovered that another staff member had already opened the box. Inside was a cylindrical container labeled with a warning, hazardous materials, and marked with the words, potassium cyanide. While startled, Caitlin quickly resealed the package and handed it to James without asking questions, understanding his instructions about confidentiality. Later that day, she saw James leaving the office with the container wrapped in brown paper. This incident further fueled her suspicions. Her growing unease led her to research potassium cyanide, and what she found was chilling. The symptoms of exposure, nausea, low blood pressure, and dizziness, closely matched those that Angela had been experiencing for days. By the time Ryan and his wife arrived at the hospital to support James, Angela's condition had become critical. Ryan, already aware of some of the family's difficulties, was taken aback when Caitlin confided in him about the strange events at the clinic. Her account shocked him so deeply that on his way to the hospital, he contacted law enforcement and relayed the details she had shared. However, this wasn't the only unusual behavior that Caitlin noticed from James. She recalled another incident. On the evening of March 6th, as she was leaving the office, James sent her a message asking her to personally ensure that a package set to arrive was delivered directly to her. At the time, this request seemed like a simple formality, but in light of subsequent events, it took on a more troubling significance. When Ryan arrived at the hospital, he decided to confront James. James claimed that the chemical in question, potassium cyanide, had been ordered at Angela's request. However, his explanations sounded hesitant, raising even more doubts in Ryan's mind. Concerned, Ryan relayed this information to investigators, who began to suspect that this case was far more complex than it initially appeared. On March 15th, Angela was rushed to the hospital once again. Her symptoms, severe dizziness, nausea, and sharp abdominal pain, had worsened to a critical level. Angela's brother, who had driven her to the emergency room, later told police that she could barely stand by the time they arrived. At this point, James seemed to realize that the situation was quickly slipping out of his control. Later that day, police began questioning James. Even before the formal interview started, investigators zeroed in on a key issue. How would James explain the connection between his purchase of potassium cyanide and Angela's sudden and severe decline in health? The investigation began with interviews with the medical staff at the hospital, where Angela was being treated. A nurse, who had been alerted by Ryan's concerns, confirmed that Angela's test results showed unusual markers. Her attending physician added that her symptoms, including seizures and rapid deterioration, could be consistent with exposure to a toxic substance. These statements became critical pieces of evidence, leading investigators to focus on the events leading up to Angela's hospitalization. The following day, detectives visited James's dental clinic. Caitlin, the office manager, shared several observations that further deepened the mystery. She recalled that on March 6th, James had mentioned taking care of Angela and preparing a protein shake for her. Not long after, Angela's health began to decline, a coincidence that caught the attention of investigators and raised even more questions. Caitlin also mentioned that in the days that followed, James often appeared anxious, avoided conversations, and spent a significant amount of time on the phone. What particularly caught her attention was his request for her to sign paperwork related to clinic equipment purchases. Upon reviewing these documents, investigators discovered that the amounts listed were far higher than the actual cost of the equipment, raising suspicions of potential financial misconduct. One of the clinic employees confirmed that James frequently used the office computer for personal purposes. In February, the employee recalled seeing James visit a website related to chemical reagents, which included references to substances that could be extremely dangerous. These observations aligned with the discovery of James's purchase of potassium cyanide. The investigation soon extended to James's financial activities. Detectives uncovered that on March 4th, James had transferred a significant sum of money to an unknown supplier associated with the sale of chemical substances. The order had been shipped to the clinic's address, allowing James to keep it hidden from his family. When investigators traced the delivery, they connected it to the package Caitlin had seen. She described the container with the warning label and noted that James had taken it home after retrieving it. Attention quickly turned to James's office at the clinic. Another employee reported that James had recently started locking his office door during lunch breaks, an unusual behavior for him. During a search of the office, investigators found remnants of packaging materials that appeared to match the delivery containing the potassium cyanide. Meanwhile, hospital staff continued their efforts to save Angela's life. The levels of toxic substances in her system were so high that doctors ruled out the possibility of accidental poisoning. This critical detail laid the groundwork for new allegations against James. Detectives obtained warrants to search James's home and vehicle, suspecting that additional evidence could be found to link him to Angela's deteriorating condition. Caitlin provided further testimony, pointing out that the symptoms of potassium cyanide poisoning, nausea, vomiting, and low blood pressure, aligned with what Angela had been experiencing. She also noted that the chemical could be lethal even in small doses. Each new piece of evidence deepened investigators' suspicions and brought them closer to the conclusion that Angela's health crisis was the result of deliberate actions. The investigation included an examination of James's computer. On it, detectives found notes detailing the dates and times of Angela's worsening symptoms. While the entries appeared to document her health issues, the nature of the records raised suspicions that James might have been using them to monitor and manipulate her condition. An examination of the couple's messages revealed additional details. On March 6, 2023, Angela texted James, thanking him for the coffee he had made for her. Shortly after, she mentioned feeling dizzy and weak. James responded by suggesting she check her blood pressure. Later that day, in the same conversation, James brought up powerful medications and attributed her symptoms to potential triggers, a comment that investigators later viewed as an attempt to deflect suspicion. Ryan, a longtime friend and business partner of James, shared that, in 2021, James had confided in him about serious financial troubles and marital issues. At the time, James was even considering divorce. Later, James claimed that Angela had been struggling with severe depression and mentioned an incident where he allegedly stopped her from harming herself. However, the accounts provided by their 6 children contradicted these claims. They described Angela as a vibrant, cheerful person who showed no signs of depression or unusual behavior. Investigators also looked into events from December 2022 when James demanded a despite this. He took no steps to seek professional help for Angela, whose mental health he had cited in conversations. This inconsistency, coupled with his pattern of withholding critical information, deepened suspicions that James's behavior could have been part of a calculated plan. The search of James's home and vehicle uncovered further evidence. In his home office, investigators found remnants of packaging believed to be linked to the cyanide delivery. In his car, traces of a powdery substance were discovered and sent for analysis. The accumulating evidence allowed investigators to focus on James's potential double life. Despite his outward image as a devoted family man, hidden troubles and secretive actions were beginning to surface. Financial struggles, marital discord, and detailed notes about Angela's symptoms were forming a clearer picture of what might have been happening behind the scenes. The history of James and Angela's marriage became a pivotal aspect of the investigation. Angela's sister recounted that Angela had frequently confided in her about feeling manipulated and pressured by James. She described him as someone who could spend hours discussing his problems without acknowledging fault or showing any willingness to change. Angela reportedly felt trapped in the situation but lacked the strength to break free. These accounts aligned with statements from James's colleagues who noted his frequent complaints about family difficulties. One colleague even recalled James once saying that life would be easier without all these obligations. Angela's medical records played a crucial role in the investigation. Over the past 2 years, she had visited doctors more frequently than usual, reporting unexplained symptoms such as stomach pain, dizziness, and weakness. These visits coincided with periods of heightened tension in her relationship with James, leading investigators to suspect a possible connection between her health issues and his actions. An analysis of James's search history revealed careful planning. He had researched toxic substances, including arsenic and cyanide, studied their applications, and learned methods to mask their taste in food and drinks. He also showed interest in articles about avoiding suspicion in poisoning cases. This digital trail pointed to a high level of preparation and intentionality. Financial records further illuminated the situation. Investigators found that James had been paying for a rented mailbox in a remote area which he used to receive certain deliveries. Employees at the delivery service confirmed that James frequently picked up packages, often in the evening. One of these deliveries matched the timeline of his cyanide purchase, which was already under scrutiny. Interviews with Angela's friends provided additional leads. One friend recalled that weeks before her hospitalization, Angela had complained of strange symptoms and mentioned suspecting they might be related to something she ate or drank. However, she dismissed any possibility that James could be involved, attributing her condition to exhaustion or other health issues. To clarify the situation, investigators consulted toxicologists, who conducted tests on Angela's hair. The analysis revealed traces of arsenic and other toxic substances, indicating prolonged exposure to poisons. These findings strongly suggested that Angela's deteriorating health was not accidental. The accumulated evidence, including financial transactions, witness statements, and medical test results, began to form a clear narrative. James had not only planned his actions meticulously, but had also begun implementing them long before Angela's hospitalization. Still, investigators continued their work, determined to eliminate any lingering doubts. Detectives also delved into James's financial situation, uncovering troubling details. His dental practice was in dire straits, with debts exceeding $2 million. Adding to this was his gambling habit. James had lost a substantial amount of money in Las Vegas, further destabilizing his financial standing. These revelations offered a new perspective on the marital issues between James and Angela, which, according to Angela's sister, had been far from ideal for years. Angela's sister revealed that Angela had been trying to leave the marriage for 16 years, but James always found a way to convince her to stay. According to those close to her, Angela felt emotionally drained and trapped, but couldn't summon the strength to end the relationship. These accounts led investigators to suspect that James had been using manipulation tactics to maintain control over the situation. Emails uncovered during the investigation shed light on another side of James's life. Correspondence with a woman named Karen, an orthodontist from Texas, revealed an intimate relationship that began in 2022 when Karen filed for divorce. One particular detail caught investigators' attention. James had booked airline tickets for Karen on the same day he received an order of arsenic. In an email dated March 16th, Karen expressed regret that she couldn't be with James, adding that she hoped to see him soon. Meanwhile, investigators examined life insurance policies taken out in Angela's name. They discovered 3 policies with payouts totaling a substantial amount. This finding intensified suspicions that James may have factored financial gain into his alleged plan. On March 18th at 4:29 p.m., doctors declared Angela clinically deceased. Just hours later, James was charged with first-degree intentional homicide. According to investigators, James, who frequently prepared protein shakes for his wife, allegedly attempted to add arsenic to her drink on March 6, 2023. When that attempt failed, he ordered an expedited shipment of potassium cyanide, telling the supplier it was required for a medical procedure. The next day, James was arrested. At his initial court appearance, he was charged with multiple offenses, including evidence tampering. The judge set bail at $10 million. Shortly afterward, prosecutors added 2 new charges against James Craig: solicitation of murder and solicitation of perjury. While the indictment didn't specify whom James allegedly intended to harm, Aurora Police spokesperson Joe Moylan confirmed that the intended victim was an Aurora Police detective. James Craig's trial has been delayed indefinitely. Craig, who has pleaded not guilty, is set to appear in court with a new attorney. Additionally, Craig faced allegations of secretly passing a letter from jail to another inmate who was released on bail through assistance from an adult daughter. Prosecutors stated that the letter contained a request to create a fake video, purportedly showing Angela Craig asking James to procure toxic substances for her. Following Angela's passing on March 18th, her family decided to donate her organs. This decision brought a small measure of comfort to her loved ones, knowing that her life could help save others. Her obituary, written by her family, focused on her kindness, her love for her family, and her dedication to helping those around her. omitting the tragic circumstances of her death. Meanwhile, Angela's 6 children were thrust into the center of these devastating events. After James's arrest, Angela's family took custody of them, determined to shield them from bearing the burden of his alleged actions. Angela's relatives worked tirelessly to ensure the children received the support and care they needed during this challenging time. This case uncovered the dark secrets James Craig had carefully concealed behind the facade of a successful career and a seemingly happy family life. His meticulously planned actions led to a tragic outcome that shattered not only his own life, but also the lives of his children, family, and loved ones. This story serves as a sobering reminder that outward appearances of stability and success can mask deep conflicts and hidden motives, leaving behind unanswered questions and countless lives forever changed. Story 4. The concept of crime is often tied to a specific motive. Exceptions might include acts committed by individuals with mental health issues, those under the influence of alcohol or controlled substances, or incidents occurring in moments of extreme emotional disturbance. However, even though the term motiveless crime exists, criminologists argue that most of these cases involve hidden motives that remain undiscovered. The disappearance of college student Emily Murray in 2000 shook the entire state of Ohio. Weeks later, Emily was found dead, and the person responsible for her tragic end had been hiding in plain sight, assisting law enforcement with the investigation and even offering tips to implicate others. When authorities finally arrested him, they faced a perplexing challenge. There seemed to be no discernible motive. Various theories were proposed to explain what drove him to commit such an act, but none were substantiated. To make matters more baffling, the suspect appeared to have a fondness for Emily and even seemed to protect her. But at some point something shifted, turning him into a predator. Despite nearly a quarter of a century passing since the incident, the perpetrator has never revealed why he took the life of a defenseless young woman. Who was Emily Murray? Emily Miranda Murray was born on February 19, 1980, in the small town of Sleepy Hollow, Westchester County, New York. She was the youngest of 4 siblings in a well-off family. Emily grew up alongside her 2 older brothers and 1 sister, maintaining a close bond with them throughout her life. When Emily was 2, her family relocated to Ohio, settling in Shaker Heights, Cuyahoga County. Her father had been offered a prestigious position at a scientific university and soon became the head of one of its departments. Her mother dedicated herself to raising the children and creating a warm home environment, as the family's financial security allowed them to live comfortably. The Murray children excelled academically, graduating from high school with honors and going on to attend top-tier universities. Emily, in particular, was passionate about biology and medicine, envisioning a future in the field. She was recognized as a gifted student and often ranked at the top of her class. Remarkably, Emily also managed to hold part-time jobs while donating her earnings to charitable causes. Emily's upbringing was deeply influenced by her parents' devout Christian faith. The family attended church regularly, and Emily followed their example, always eager to help those in need with both words and actions. After graduating high school, she dedicated a year to traveling the world with various humanitarian organizations. This journey took her to New Zealand, Australia, Japan, and several European countries. In 1998, Emily Murray began her studies at Kenyon College in Gambia, Ohio, moving into the campus dorms. Those who knew her described her as someone brimming with life and energy, spreading positivity to everyone around her. Emily was kind, empathetic, approachable, and incredibly driven. At the same time, she had a sensitive side, often showing vulnerability and moments of melancholy. She kept a personal journal where she recorded her innermost thoughts, dreams, and fears. Missing after a night shift, by 2000, Emily had advanced to her junior year in college. Alongside her demanding academic schedule, she remained deeply involved in church-based charitable work and took on evening shifts as a waitress at a local restaurant. Her workload was immense, yet she seemed to handle it all with grace. She even found time to enjoy her personal life, attending social gatherings that she cherished. However, it would soon become clear that not everything in her life was as seamless as it appeared. On the morning of Tuesday, November 3rd, 2000, Emily's two dorm roommates woke up to find her bed empty. They were puzzled. Emily was always considerate and let them know if she planned to stay elsewhere overnight. Her restaurant shift had been scheduled to end at 2 a.m., so they assumed she might have stayed late at work or gone straight to class. But when they noticed that her textbooks and notes were still on her shelf, things began to feel unusual. The roommates went about their morning, heading to their lectures while asking friends if anyone had seen Emily. It turned out no one had seen her since the previous day, and she hadn't shown up for any of her classes. While her absence was unsettling, her friends initially tried to rationalize the situation, hoping there was a reasonable explanation. That evening, a party was planned to celebrate a close friend's 20th birthday, an event Emily had been looking forward to for weeks. She had carefully chosen a gift and had even helped organize a surprise for the birthday celebrant. Missing the party was unthinkable for Emily, yet when she didn't show up, her friends grew increasingly alarmed. Desperate for answers, they reached out to Emily's family, thinking she might have returned home due to an emergency. Her parents were shocked and distraught upon hearing she had vanished. That same night, they drove to Gambia to join the search, determined to find out what had happened to their daughter. By morning, the Mauis, along with their older children, had arrived at the campus, frantically trying to figure out what could have happened to their youngest daughter. By that time, word of Emily's disappearance had spread throughout the college community. Multiple groups of volunteers, friends, and classmates were searching for her, but there were no signs. She seemed to have vanished without a trace. It was soon discovered that Emily's car, a dark green Subaru Outback gifted by her father for her 20th birthday, was also missing. The Mai's first move was to contact campus security, reporting that one of the students was missing and requesting help organizing a search effort. However, their concerns were met with indifference. Security staff dismissed their worries, suggesting that Emily was likely spending time alone with a boyfriend and would return soon. Despite the family's insistence that Emily would never leave without notifying someone, they were advised to wait a little longer. More than 24 hours had passed since Emily had last been seen, and her family was growing increasingly desperate. Realizing campus security would be of no help, they filed a missing person report with the local police. To their shock, law enforcement initially seemed to downplay the situation as well, speculating that Emily might have gone off on her own or decided to take an unannounced break. After all, they reasoned, she was a 20-year-old college student who didn't need to account for her every move. Still, the police eventually agreed to inspect Emily's dorm room. That's when they discovered she had left behind her ID, bank cards, and personal belongings. She had been last seen wearing her work uniform from her restaurant shift, which suggested she hadn't changed clothes since leaving her job. This raised serious doubts about the idea that she had gone off to spend time with a boyfriend or taken an impromptu break. It seemed highly unlikely that Emily would leave without money or essential items. Her last day at work, Emily was officially declared a missing person on the second day after her disappearance. By then, her family, friends, and concerned members of the community were already conducting their own searches, distributing flyers with her photo around town and combing the surrounding areas. The investigation began at the restaurant where Emily had last been seen. Located just across the street from the campus, the restaurant, called the Pirates Cove, was a popular hangout for students thanks to its convenient location and affordable menu. It quickly came to light that Emily's shift that night was her last. She had quit her job that evening. Overwhelmed by her rigorous schedule, she had decided to cut back on her responsibilities. Between her demanding coursework, volunteer work at the church, and part-time evening shifts, she had been struggling to manage everything. Her packed schedule had also taken a toll on her personal life. Just a month earlier, she had ended her relationship with her boyfriend, Adam, because they rarely had time to see each other. That evening, many of Emily's friends stopped by the Pirates Cove to support her on her last day at work. However, no one stayed too late since they had classes the next morning. Her shift officially ended at 2 a.m., but Emily stayed an additional 30 minutes to finish up some tasks. This meant her coworkers were the last to see her, and it was their accounts that the police would rely on to piece together the night's events. Emily wasn't alone during those final moments at the restaurant. Her friend Olivia, who also worked as a waitress, and a bartender named David Cale, were there with her, helping to close up. Together they cleaned up the dining area and finished around 2:45 a.m. Shortly afterward, everyone began heading home. This was corroborated by Gregory McKnight, a 24-year-old cook, who was the last to leave and locked up the restaurant at 3:15 a.m. None of her co-workers noticed anything unusual. Emily behaved like her normal self, kind, cheerful, and polite. She didn't mention any plans for the rest of the night and told them she was simply heading back to her dorm to get some sleep before her morning classes. A troubled spirit beneath the smile. When investigators searched Emily's dorm room, they found her personal journal, which contained troubling entries. Despite her upbeat and friendly demeanor, Emily had been battling a prolonged period of depression, something she had kept private and tried to manage on her own. Known for being sensitive and empathetic, Emily often internalized the pain and suffering of others, a quality that made her deeply compassionate, but also emotionally vulnerable. Through her charitable work, Emily was regularly exposed to harsh realities of life, including stories of injustice and cruelty. She poured her energy into helping those in need, but it frustrated her to feel powerless against the larger forces of the world. In her journal, she wrote about how overwhelming these emotions could be and how difficult it was for her to cope with the weight of her empathy. While the journal contained no references to plans of self-harm or taking drastic measures, detectives could not entirely rule out the possibility that Emily might have decided to step away from her life. This theory deeply upset Emily's family and close friends. They strongly refuted the idea, insisting that Emily's faith was a central part of her life, and that she would never consider such an act. She was a deeply religious person, and her belief system regarded such actions as an unforgivable sin. Furthermore, Emily had ambitious plans for her future, which she had outlined in her journal. In one entry, she sketched a picture of her dream life: a large home, herself, her future husband, their 5 children, and a dozen dogs. She aspired to build a life centered around love, family, and community, a goal that seemed to motivate her every day. Since Emily had disappeared along with her car, investigators initially considered the possibility of her running away. They theorized that, in light of her struggles with depression, she might have decided to leave town to reflect on her life. Her recent breakup with her boyfriend and resignation from her job could have exacerbated her emotional challenges, making this a plausible explanation for her disappearance. The first person investigators turned their attention to was Emily's ex-boyfriend, Adam, a logical starting point in cases like this. Their relationship had lasted about 1.5 years, but had been tumultuous, with multiple breakups and reconciliations. This time, however, Emily had decided to end things for good, and had made it clear to Adam during what appeared to be a calm and amicable conversation. They agreed to remain friends, but investigators couldn't help but wonder, what if Adam hadn't been able to let her go? Adam willingly came to the police station when contacted. He appeared genuinely distressed and seemed to deeply care about Emily's well-being. He explained that, on the night of Emily's disappearance, he and his roommate had stopped by the Pirates Cove, but left around midnight. They returned to their dorm, where other students confirmed seeing them. Adam and his roommate reportedly stayed in for the rest of the night, a claim corroborated by 2 other dorm mates. With a solid alibi and no evidence to suggest involvement, Adam was quickly ruled out as a suspect. A workplace romance investigators then turned their focus to Emily's co-workers. During their inquiries, a cook at the Pirates Cove shared a surprising piece of information. The bartender David Cale was said to have had romantic feelings for Emily, which she had not reciprocated. On the night of Emily's disappearance, Cale and Emily worked the same shift, stayed late to close up, and left the restaurant just 10 minutes apart. Could Cale have waited for her outside and done something to harm her after she rejected him? David was brought in for a second round of questioning. He admitted that he had once asked Emily out, but after she turned him down, he had never pursued the topic again. He maintained that they had a friendly, professional relationship and nothing more. Furthermore, David provided what detectives deemed a rock-solid alibi. After his shift, His father picked him up from the restaurant, and they immediately drove to another state to attend his sister's wedding. The alibi was verified, leaving investigators with no evidence to link him to Emily's disappearance. Once the bartender was ruled out as a suspect, detectives received a new lead from the same cook, Greg McKnight. He hinted that another cook, Dave Yoakum, also had an unusual interest in Emily. Dave was known to struggle with interactions with women. He was awkward, rude, and prone to losing his temper when rejected. Other waitresses confirmed this behavior, sharing that Dave had made clumsy advances toward them as well. When his attempts were rebuffed, he often responded with sharp remarks and displayed a generally disrespectful attitude. Furthermore, just 4 days after Emily's disappearance, Yoakum was fired from the restaurant following a heated argument, which investigators found highly suspicious. On the night Emily vanished, Yoakum was off work and had not been seen at the restaurant. However, detectives needed to interview him and verify his whereabouts. When questioned, Dave expressed genuine surprise at being considered a suspect in the case. He provided a solid alibi, explaining that he had attended a concert by a well-known rock band in a nearby city that night, accompanied by friends who confirmed his story. A dead end. With every suspect cleared and no new evidence emerging, the investigation ground to a halt. Emily's family and friends held on to hope, praying she would return home safely. However, experienced detectives feared the worst, suspecting she was no longer alive. An unexpected twist. Let's rewind to about a month before Emily's disappearance, to an event that initially seemed unrelated to her case. On October 1st, 2000, a minor car accident occurred on the outskirts of Harrison, a small town in Vinton County, Ohio. A man named Ronaldo Hopkins was driving home when an old Buick swerved into his lane, causing a collision. Hopkins got out of his car to assess the damage and noticed a firearm inside the other vehicle's trunk, which had popped open from the impact. Alarmed, he immediately called the police to report the incident. Although the other driver was fined for the accident and the gun was confiscated, authorities allowed him to leave. More than 2 months later, on December 9, 2000, that same driver was charged with involvement in a theft. According to the case documents, he resided in a remote trailer park, so 2 officers were dispatched to deliver a court summons requiring his appearance for questioning. When officers arrived at the trailer, they found it in an isolated area, far removed from the other residences in the park. The property appeared abandoned, with 2 rusted, damaged vehicles parked out front that seemed unlikely to ever run again. However, behind the trailer, the officers discovered something that didn't match the scene: a dark green Subaru Outback. After running the vehicle's plates through their database, they confirmed it was Emily Murray's car, listed as missing along with its owner. Information about the discovery of Emily's car was immediately relayed to the Gambier Division, investigating her case, along with the name of the person living at the property where the vehicle was found. That individual was Gregory McKnight, the same cook from the restaurant where Emily had worked. McKnight had previously attempted to shift suspicion onto his coworkers, managing to avoid close scrutiny himself. A search warrant for McKnight's trailer was secured in record time, and a police team was dispatched to the location. The door lock was broken and 2 officers entered to begin their search. Almost immediately, they were overwhelmed by the sickening smell of decomposition. Following the odor to the back of the trailer, they found its source, a young woman's body wrapped in a carpet. From the start, there was little doubt that the remains belonged to Emily, and forensic testing soon confirmed it. The cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head. The bullet had been fired at close range, with the weapon pressed against the right side of her skull. Spent shell casings and a significant amount of blood were found at the scene, indicating that the crime had been committed inside the trailer. Detectives now turned their attention to arresting and questioning their primary suspect, McKnight, in custody. Gregory McKnight was taken into custody later that day, initially on charges unrelated to Emily's death, specifically his alleged involvement in an armed robbery. However, when he was informed about the discovery in his trailer, he went silent, refusing to answer questions and immediately requesting a lawyer. While there was no direct evidence linking him to Emily's death at that moment, police held him in custody pending further investigation. The body in the well. Neighbors at the trailer park told investigators they had not seen or heard anything unusual. This wasn't surprising given that McKnight's trailer was located far from the other homes. The property itself was in a state of disrepair, littered with trash and surrounded by rusted, dilapidated vehicles. Detectives conducted a thorough search of the area, hoping to uncover additional evidence. It didn't take long for them to stumble upon a small, overgrown well, hidden under a sheet of metal weighed down by a fallen tree. The well was drained, and at the bottom, investigators discovered a human skeleton which appeared to belong to a male. Nearby, several additional bone fragments were found scattered across the property. Forensic analysis confirmed that all the remains belonged to a single individual, whose identity was still unknown. However, police soon connected the discovery to a missing person case from 6 months earlier. A 20-year-old student named Glenn Julius, a friend of McKnight, had vanished without a trace. Glenn's girlfriend had reported that the last time she saw him, he had been planning to attend a party with McKnight. When the search for Glenn Julius began, Gregory McKnight quickly became the primary suspect. However, McKnight claimed that he and Glenn had an argument at the gathering, and Glenn left with some new acquaintances in his car. After that, no one saw him again. Investigators found no evidence to support McKnight's story, but they also lacked concrete proof to implicate him in the disappearance, so he was released. Glenn's girlfriend later identified fragments of his clothing and belts recovered from the well. His family provided dental records, which confirmed that the remains belonged to Glenn. Additionally, several of his personal items were discovered inside McKnight's trailer. Further investigation revealed that McKnight had illegally sold Glenn's car shortly after his disappearance. The vehicle was sold to associates, who were also implicated in an armed robbery case. The car had been hastily repainted, and its license plates replaced with fake ones. After one of McKnight's accomplices was arrested, authorities located the car. In the trunk, they found significant traces of cleaned-up blood that, upon forensic testing, were confirmed to belong to Glenn. This suggested that Glenn, either wounded or already deceased, had been transported in the trunk. Glenn's body had been partially dismembered, and the work had been done crudely, likely using makeshift tools. Deep scratches on the bones resembled marks left by a saw. Inside McKnight's trailer, investigators found a shovel, an axe, and several other tools, all of which were taken for forensic examination. It was conclusively determined that the axe had been used during the dismemberment, though other tools left unidentifiable marks. Who was Gregory McKnight? Gregory McKnight was born on November 12, 1976, in an underprivileged suburb of Columbus, Ohio. He grew up without a father, in a large, struggling family where everyone had to fend for themselves. McKnight started stealing as a young boy, first catching the attention of law enforcement at age 14. By the time he was 15, he had committed his first fatal crime during a botched robbery. Because McKnight had accomplices who were older, the jury showed leniency towards him, and he received a relatively light sentence. He was sentenced to just 6 years, and was sent to a juvenile detention facility. In 1997, he was released and soon married a woman named Catherine, who later gave birth to 2 children. The couple lived with Catherine's parents for a while, until McKnight saved enough money to buy his trailer. However, the move to their new residence never happened. In May 2000, Gregory McKnight committed the crime of killing Glenn Julius, hiding his remains in the well behind his trailer. Then, in November of that same year, he kidnapped and killed Emily Murray, leaving her body to decompose inside the trailer. Catherine's suspicion during questioning. McKnight's wife Catherine admitted that she had grown suspicious about the trailer. Her husband frequently went there alone and refused to let her visit or even approach the property. She assumed he was using the space to meet lovers or to harbor his criminal associates, who might have been hiding from the law. She had considered many possibilities, but the idea that he was storing human remains there never crossed her mind. Trial and sentence. Although the evidence against McKnight was extensive, most of it was circumstantial. Authorities were unable to determine exactly how and where Julius had been killed. As a result, the prosecution could not seek the death penalty for that particular crime. Emily's case seemed more straightforward. Her body was found at the scene, with clear traces linking both her and McKnight to the trailer. However, the murder weapon was never recovered, and there was no apparent motive for such a cruel act. Emily had not been subjected to any form of assault, was not robbed, and even her car was abandoned behind the trailer. The question remained, why would McKnight commit such a horrific crime against the young college student? Numerous co-workers testified that McKnight had always behaved respectfully toward Emily. He was described as polite and, on one occasion, had even stepped in to protect her from an intoxicated customer who had acted inappropriately toward her. McKnight himself refused to cooperate with investigators. He denied all charges and provided no details about either crime. The prosecution argued that after Emily's restaurant shift, McKnight had lured her into a trap. He might have asked her for help, knowing she was kind and trusting, and Emily, unaware of the danger, couldn't refuse. Once inside the trailer, he may have expressed romantic feelings for her, but when she turned him down, he flew into a rage and committed the crime. The defense attempted to argue that McKnight was mentally unfit, but a psychiatric evaluation concluded that he was fully aware of his actions and could be held responsible. Switching tactics, McKnight's attorneys tried to paint Emily as a deeply depressed individual, with self-destructive tendencies, claiming McKnight merely assisted her in fulfilling a supposed wish to die. This argument was met with outrage from Emily's loved ones, and failed to sway the court. The verdict in 2002, Gregory McKnight was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and involvement in armed robbery. He was sentenced to death by lethal injection and sent to death row to await execution. All appeals and requests for clemency were denied. In 2015, Gregory McKnight requested that his sentence be carried out, stating that he would rather die than rot in prison while waiting for execution. However, he soon changed his mind and attempted to appeal the sentence once again, but his efforts were unsuccessful. In 2020, McKnight filed a legal complaint alleging racism and unfair treatment during his trial. He claimed that both the judge and the jury members were white and had shown bias against him, resulting in what he argued was an excessively harsh punishment. As of today, Gregory McKnight remains on death row, awaiting execution. Story 5. A love triangle is a tangled web of forbidden emotions and volatile relationships. Such situations often bring emotional turmoil and intense conflict, sometimes escalating to threats against the physical and mental well-being of those involved. Even more chilling is when one person is unaware they've been caught in this web until it's too late. The story of Henry Stenge unfolds like a gripping detective thriller, where passion, deceit, a double life, and struggles with dependency intersect. Henry believed he had found true love with a much younger woman, a relationship that could have been considered unconventional given their age difference. However, unbeknownst to him, the woman was simultaneously involved in another romantic entanglement. For months, she skillfully manipulated both men to achieve her own goals, until her carefully crafted house of cards collapsed. On Friday, June 1st, 2018, around 7 a.m., an amateur photographer and hiking enthusiast named Marcus was exploring the barren landscape of Joshua Tree National Park in southeastern California. As he ventured off a main trail, Marcus noticed a large flock of vultures scavenging over something. Assuming it was a carcass of a large animal, he chose to keep his distance. Equipped with a compact camera he typically used for landscape photography, Marcus decided to capture the scene of the birds circling in the desolate desert. He snapped a few photos and continued his hike, putting the unusual sight out of his mind. The following day, Marcus shared details of his hike with his wife, while transferring the photos from his camera to their home computer. As his wife examined the images, her expression changed dramatically. She called Marcus over and pointed to one of the photos. Upon zooming in, it became disturbingly clear that something resembling a human leg was partially buried in the sand beneath the vultures. Shaken, the couple promptly contacted local authorities to report what they had seen. Marcus handed over all the photos and described the exact location where he had spotted the birds. The area near one of the park's major roads was relatively easy for investigators to locate. What started as a routine discovery turned into one of the most complex and astonishing criminal investigations in recent years. About 30 feet from the roadside, a gathering of vultures and a pair of coyotes stood out in stark contrast to the desolate desert landscape. It was unusual to see coyotes scavenging in broad daylight, which immediately raised suspicion among the officers. They pulled their vehicle to the shoulder, stepped out, and approached the scene. There, they found a shallow grave hastily dug into the dry earth, less than 2 feet deep. Local wildlife had already disturbed the site, exposing its grim contents. When forensic specialists arrived to exhume the remains, it became clear this was no accident of nature. The remains belonged to a middle-aged white man, estimated to have been buried there for about a week. The body had been partially unearthed, with the lower half closer to the surface, allowing scavengers to access it. Several gruesome injuries were evident. The man's skull showed multiple fractures, consistent with blows from a heavy, blunt object. The scene painted a harrowing picture of an aggressive and deliberate act. Judging by the shallow grave's proximity to the road and its hurried construction, the perpetrator had been in a rush. If they had ventured farther into the desert and dug a slightly deeper hole, the body might have remained hidden for years. Instead, they chose to conceal the crime hastily and left the scene recklessly. Forensic analysis indicated that the crime likely occurred elsewhere. The grave contained minimal traces of blood, despite the extensive injuries, suggesting the body was transported post-mortem. This deduction pointed investigators toward the troubling conclusion that the crime was carefully premeditated, at least in part. However, despite the perpetrator's apparent haste, they had left no obvious clues or evidence for investigators to follow. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be severe blunt force trauma to the head. The force of the blows suggested a deeply personal motive, with the attacker displaying overwhelming aggression. Investigators speculated that the crime stemmed from hatred or a personal vendetta, but the victim's identity and the story behind his death remained a mystery. Despite the body's condition, degraded by decomposition and scavenging wildlife, investigators managed to recover several fingerprints from the remains. When the prints were run through a criminal database, they yielded no matches. This lack of prior records suggested the victim had never been in legal trouble before. However, when the prints were uploaded to the Department of Motor Vehicles database, investigators were able to identify the victim. The remains belonged to Henry Stenge, a 54-year-old resident of Marietta, a suburban city in Riverside County, California. Henry's home was about 90 miles from where his body was discovered. Investigators immediately headed to his residence, hoping to uncover answers about how and why his life had ended so tragically in the remote wilderness of Joshua Tree. Henry Stenge lived alone in a home that reflected his solitary lifestyle, a cluttered, unkempt bachelor pad. Personal belongings were scattered throughout the house, and empty pizza boxes and takeout containers littered countertops. The place lacked the warmth of a lived-in home but showed no signs of forced entry, theft, or a struggle. It was clear that whatever had happened to Henry had occurred somewhere else. The most unsettling discovery awaited investigators in the garage attached to the house. This space, likely the scene of the crime, told a gruesome story. Dried blood spatter covered the walls, tools, and storage boxes Henry had kept there. On the floor was a large, congealed pool of blood, partially smeared as though someone had attempted to clean it but quickly abandoned the effort. In the corner of the garage lay a pile of blood-soaked rags, heavily doused with bleach, evidenced by the empty bottle discarded nearby. Near the door leading into the house, investigators found what appeared to be the weapon used in the crime, a heavy dumbbell stained with dried blood. Overhead, dangling wires suggested that a surveillance camera had been forcibly removed. Further inspection of the house revealed additional cameras, one in the living room and another in the hallway, also torn from their mounts. Whoever had committed this brutal act had knowledge of the camera placements and had taken them to eliminate any potential evidence. Unfortunately, the perpetrator left behind little for investigators to work with. There were no foreign fingerprints, no shoe prints, and no blood or DNA from anyone other than Henry. The scene seemed meticulously sanitized, leaving detectives with more questions than answers. Henry had no known legal troubles. He was divorced, lived alone, and had no apparent enemies. Neighbors described him as a quiet and friendly man, someone who mostly kept to himself but was always polite. Yet the sheer ferocity of the crime raised questions. Who would commit such a savage act? Was it someone from Henry's past, or did it have to do with his unusual hobbies? Most troubling of all, why had no one reported him missing sooner? Henry grew up in a close-knit family, one that valued respect and strong connections. His mother and two younger sisters lived with their families in a nearby town. The family frequently stayed in touch, sharing regular phone calls and occasional visits. However, in recent months, Henry had become more withdrawn, speaking less with his loved ones and keeping details about his life to himself. His family worried about him but tried not to overreact. When he failed to contact them for a week, they grew increasingly concerned but decided to wait before raising an alarm. The news of Henry's violent death was devastating for his mother and sisters. Shocked and heartbroken, they immediately cooperated with investigators, offering any information they could in the hopes it would help solve the case. Henry Steng was once a vibrant and athletic man. He loved outdoor adventures, hiking, traveling, and spending time in nature. A talented guitarist and an avid motorsports enthusiast, Henry cherished his motorcycle, a prized possession that had carried him across multiple states. But in the spring of 2014, everything changed. One day, as Henry prepared to set off on a ride, his motorcycle was struck by a pickup truck driven by an intoxicated driver. The collision was devastating. The driver dragged Henry nearly 300 feet before finally stopping. Miraculously, Henry survived, but his injuries were life-altering. The crash left Henry with severe damage to his legs, requiring multiple major surgeries. He endured months of grueling rehabilitation to regain the ability to walk. However, the physical pain persisted and over-the-counter medication offered no relief. Doctors prescribed powerful painkillers to manage his condition, but the medication quickly led to dependency, which spiraled into a debilitating addiction. At the time of the accident, Henry had been married for over a decade, and he and his wife were raising two children together. His wife initially supported him, as he struggled with recovery and his growing dependency on medication. However, the strain proved too much. By 2016, she filed for divorce, taking their children and moving to a nearby town to be closer to her family. Despite the separation, she maintained cordial relations with Henry, allowing him to stay involved in their children's lives. After the accident, Henry's physical limitations forced him to abandon many of his previous hobbies. Instead, he turned his attention to his love for technology and electronics. He spent much of his time tinkering with gadgets and equipment, transforming one room of his home into a fully equipped radio studio. From there, Henry launched a podcast, using the platform to discuss current events and share his often candid and unfiltered opinions. Henry's broadcasts became a daily routine. He expressed his thoughts openly, often delving into philosophical musings or bold commentary on controversial topics. The lack of censorship in his show drew a dedicated audience, earning him both loyal fans and fervent critics. Some listeners, particularly those who disagreed with his views, began to provoke him intentionally, goading him into emotional outbursts. Clips of these tirades were recorded and shared on social media, often taken out of context to paint Henry in a negative light. In one online community for amateur radio enthusiasts, detectives uncovered a particularly hostile individual who seemed to harbor a deep grudge against Henry. This person frequently insulted Henry and posted edited clips of his broadcasts, harshly criticizing his statements. Upon closer investigation, however, it became apparent that this individual's behavior was not unique to Henry. The user had a habit of targeting various figures in the community, using the platform to demean and attack others as a form of entertainment. While their animosity toward Henry was evident, it was unclear whether this online hostility had any connection to the crime. In late January 2018, just 4 months before the tragedy, Henry Steng experienced a terrifying ordeal. According to his family, someone broke into his home in the middle of the night while he was sound asleep. The intruder entered through a window and attacked Henry with a hammer, delivering several blows to his head. Nothing was stolen from the house, making it clear that the intent wasn't robbery but likely a personal vendetta. The attacker brought the hammer with them and took it when they left. Surprisingly, Henry didn't report the incident to the police. Instead, he took matters into his own hands by installing hidden surveillance cameras throughout his house. Whoever entered his home the second time knew about these cameras and their locations. When investigators pieced together Henry's final days, they found his last known podcast broadcast had aired on the evening of Thursday, May 24, 2018. From that point on, there were no records of outgoing or incoming calls, no text messages, and no activity on his utilities. Neither water nor electricity had been used since that night, leading investigators to believe this was the day Henry lost his life. Detectives began their investigation by interviewing those closest to Henry. They learned that his divorce proceedings were still ongoing, despite his and his ex-wife's efforts to maintain civility for the sake of their 2 children. The couple had been locked in a heated legal battle over the house, where Henry lived after the separation. Meanwhile, his ex-wife and their children had moved in with her mother. Adding to the tension, it came to light that Henry's ex-wife had been covering the utility bills for the house. After the accident that left Henry unable to work, he survived on a small disability allowance, which wasn't enough to support himself fully. Despite their separation, she continued helping him financially. Neighbors reported that Henry's ex-wife visited him periodically, likely in and resolve their property dispute. These visits, however, often escalated into loud arguments, with the couple's shouting matches audible throughout the neighborhood. The discord raised a crucial question. Could the mother of Henry's children have been so desperate to resolve their conflict over the house that she resorted to extreme measures? At this point in the investigation, Henry's ex-wife became the primary suspect. Detectives brought her in for questioning, where she shared a somber account of their relationship. According to Henry's ex-wife, their marriage had once been happy and stable, but everything changed after Henry's motorcycle accident. She had done everything she could to help him recover and adapt to his new life, but the long-term use of prescription medications altered his personality, making him increasingly difficult to live with. Eventually, she felt she had no choice but to leave. Despite the separation, she continued to support him by paying his bills, ensuring he had a roof over his head. Her loyalty and financial support made it difficult for investigators to determine whether she could be capable of committing such a heinous act. The detectives had to dig deeper. While Henry's ex-wife remained a person of interest, her story painted a more complex picture, one that called for further investigation into Henry's strained relationships and hidden conflicts. Henry's ex-wife initially sought a peaceful resolution to their property dispute, but the situation took a dramatic turn when Henry introduced a young girlfriend into his life. He announced his intention to live in the house with his new partner, a declaration that ignited conflict. Overcome by his infatuation, Henry appeared to neglect the needs of his children entirely. Despite their differences, Henry's ex-wife had no apparent motive to harm him. On the contrary, she expressed pity for her former spouse. Moreover, she had a solid alibi for the day investigators believed the crime took place. She was on a week-long business trip in another state. With her cleared of suspicion, detectives turned their attention to the mysterious young woman Henry had been so enamored with. Henry's mother revealed that about 10 months before his death, her son began dating a much younger woman named Ashley Stapp, who was just in her early 20s. Neither Henry's mother nor his sisters approved of Ashley, finding her behavior odd and her intentions unclear. Given Henry's circumstances, his age, disability, and reliance on a small disability allowance, it was hard to understand what had drawn the young college student to him. While Ashley didn't appear to be financially motivated, it was evident that she had her own reasons for maintaining the relationship. The romance progressed rapidly, raising concerns among Henry's family, who tried to warn him of potential risks. However, Henry dismissed their concerns, proudly declaring Ashley to be his ideal woman. A neighbor provided additional insight, stating that Ashley was a regular visitor to Henry's home and that they had chatted on several occasions. The neighbor specifically recalled Ashley driving a distinctive blue Chevrolet with a large dent on the rear passenger door. The day police conducted their search of Henry's home, Ashley was spotted again. Witnesses reported seeing her slowly drive past the house, appearing to observe the scene from a distance before speeding away without stopping. Her actions raised questions. If she had noticed that Henry hadn't been in touch for a week and then saw police at his house, why didn't she inquire about what was happening? Her behavior seemed suspicious, and investigators were eager to speak with her. As detectives delved deeper into Ashley's background, her social media profile revealed a startling twist. Her public photos and posts made no mention of Henry. Instead, she appeared to be in a committed relationship with another man, a young, fit U.S. Marine. The man in question was identified as Curtis Kruger, a 30-year-old lieutenant in the United States Marine Corps. Pictures of the couple together showed them embracing and smiling, with no indication of Ashley's involvement with Henry. This revelation suggested a tangled web of secrets and deceit, raising critical questions about Ashley's true intentions and the dynamics of her relationships with both men. Investigators now had to determine whether the volatile circumstances of this hidden love triangle had led to the violent crime that ended Henry's life. Curtis Kruger's military career kept him frequently on the move, spending most of his time on base with limited chances to see Ashley Stapp. Their relationship consisted largely of weekend visits, and even those weren't guaranteed. When they did manage to meet, they would often take trips out of town to enjoy each other's company in private. Occasionally, Ashley visited Curtis on base during family days and other military events, blending seamlessly into his world. The couple had even begun planning a wedding. Curtis often spoke about how Ashley was the woman of his dreams, someone he never wanted to lose. However, doubts lingered in his mind. He confided in his sister about Ashley's frequent disappearances, her refusal to answer his calls, and her lack of explanations for her absences. Suspicious, Curtis installed tracking software on Ashley's phone to monitor her movements. It didn't take long for him to uncover the truth. Curtis confronted Ashley at a gas station near Henry Stenge's home. Under pressure, she admitted where she had been spending her time and even gave Curtis the address. However, she denied being unfaithful, instead revealing a troubling secret. Ashley claimed that a hip injury she had sustained years earlier had led to a dependency on powerful painkillers. She further explained that Henry, who was also battling a similar dependency, had been trying to reduce his usage. This effort had left him with a surplus of medication, which Ashley had been taking for herself. She claimed that Henry forced her to provide something in return for the medication and accused him of abusive behavior. Enraged by her story, Curtis took matters into his own hands. Armed with a hammer, he entered Henry's home on a cold January night and attacked him in his sleep. Curtis believed he had killed Henry and later confessed his actions to his sister, who would go on to become a key witness. Unbeknownst to Curtis, Henry survived the attack. Refusing to report the incident to the authorities, Henry assumed the assault was related to his outspoken podcasting activities. He had no idea his girlfriend and her double life were at the center of the attack. With Curtis and Ashley as prime suspects, detectives faced a challenge. They lacked sufficient evidence to make an arrest, and both suspects could have invoked their right to remain silent and requested legal counsel, potentially stalling the investigation. To overcome this, the police devised a clever plan to catch the pair off guard, a trap that would ultimately expose the truth. First, the authorities obtained a court order to monitor Curtis and Ashley's phone conversations. Then, officers visited Ashley's brother and showed him a photograph of her with Henry, asking if he recognized anyone in the image. He immediately identified his sister, but said he didn't know the man next to her. The officers explained that they were investigating a serious crime and needed to establish the identity of the man in the photo. They asked the brother to send Ashley the picture and try to find out more. Her reaction came quickly. Ashley called her brother and claimed she had no idea who the man was or anything about a crime. Shortly after, Ashley called Curtis in a panicked state. During the emotional conversation, she explained that the police had somehow connected her to the investigation. The two suspects expressed confusion over how this had happened, confident that they had covered their tracks by removing the cameras and hiding the body in the desert. While they avoided using explicit language about the crime, Their discussion included specific details that only someone involved in the events would know. Both Curtis and Ashley were arrested the same day and taken to the station separately for questioning. Curtis immediately refused to speak and requested a lawyer. Ashley, however, was confronted with the recording of her conversation with Curtis. Realizing there was no way to deny her involvement, she began making a confession. Initially, Ashley's statements were inconsistent and unclear. She admitted to being at the crime scene the night of the attack, but claimed she hadn't seen the attacker. According to her first account, someone had broken into the house and Henry went to investigate, only to be ambushed in the garage, when detectives revealed evidence that both her and Curtis' phones were traced to Henry's home. On the night of the crime, Ashley's story shifted. She admitted to being romantically involved with both men for nearly 10 months. After Curtis found out about her relationship with Henry, he decided to confront him. Ashley confessed that after Curtis attacked Henry in January, leaving him severely injured, he believed Ashley would stay away from Henry, but when he learned that she continued to see him, Curtis became enraged. On the night of the crime, Curtis drove to Henry's home, where he attacked him again. Ashley admitted to helping Curtis cover up the crime. She revealed that she had shown him where Henry's surveillance cameras were located, helped him remove them, and assisted in hiding Henry's body in the desert. Finally, Ashley disclosed the location of the hammer Curtis had used in the first attack in January. This weapon, when recovered, still had traces of Henry's blood and Curtis' fingerprints, serving as critical evidence in the case. The trial of Curtis Kruger and Ashley Stapp began in August 2020. Curtis continued to deny any wrongdoing, claiming that he was defending the honor of his fiancée. His attorney argued that Ashley was the true instigator, leading a double life and manipulating both men for her own benefit. The defense also highlighted that after the brutal crime, Ashley had taken all of Henry's medications from his home for her personal use. In September 2020, Curtis was found guilty of assaulting Henry and second-degree murder and evidence tampering. He was sentenced to 18 years in prison, with eligibility for parole no earlier than 2031. Ashley accepted a plea deal, admitting to charges of evidence tampering and obstruction of justice. She was sentenced to 9 months in jail, 2 years of probation, and was required to attend treatment for her dependency issues. Ashley was released after serving just 4 months, but violated the terms of her probation and was sent back to jail to serve the remaining 5 months of her sentence. Ashley has been free for some time now, but there is no reliable information about her current whereabouts or life. Story 6. Why do some young women choose much older men as their husbands? The story of Rosanna Galliano was not unique. A young college student fell in love with a man who was the same age as her father and married him. However, the tragic end of this union shocked all of Argentina and became one of the most discussed topics in the media. Who was Rosanna Galliano? Rosanna Edith Rodriguez Galliano was born on November 24, 1978, in a suburb of Buenos Aires. She was the youngest of 4 children in the family of Ronaldo Galliano and Graciela Rodriguez. Rosanna grew up alongside her older brothers, Oscar and Gustavo, as well as her sister Monica. The siblings were very close from childhood. Her father owned a small car repair shop and mechanic. Her mother had once worked as a teacher at a local high school, but after having children, she decided to leave her teaching career and dedicate herself to raising her kids and managing the household. Everyone who knew Rosanna personally described her as a cheerful, lively, and very sociable young woman. She had many friends at school, was actively involved in dance, and had a talent for drawing. She dreamed of becoming an artist or an interior designer one day. She was determined to pursue her goals and, after graduation, enrolled at the National University of the Arts in Argentina. It's likely that she would have achieved everything she set her mind to, if not for the arrival of Jose Ares in her life. In 2001, a man named Jose Jacinto Ares came to Ronaldo Galliano's workshop with his vintage car, which had a rather complicated issue. The experienced mechanic agreed to take on the job. While discussing the details and cost of the repair, Rosanna stopped by her father's workshop to drop off lunch that her mother had prepared. Rosanna, with her youthful beauty, large eyes, and radiant smile, immediately caught Eris's attention. The man began visiting the workshop daily, supposedly to check on the progress of the repair and monitor the work. He always came during lunchtime, hoping to see Rosanna again. Now, it's important to provide a little background on Jose Eris and his dark past. He was born on November 28, 1948, in the Famaglia department in the northwestern part of the Argentine province of Tucumán, to Jacinto Pedro Eris and Elsa Dorothea Aguilar. He had Italian roots on his side and Greek roots on his mother's. Much of his childhood and youth was spent in Naples and on the Greek island of Crete. Some sources suggest that Jose Eris's father had close ties to organized crime and amassed a considerable fortune through illegal activities. In the mid-1980s, Jacinto mysteriously died under circumstances that pointed to a targeted attack, possibly orchestrated by someone with an agenda. At the time of his father's death, Jose was serving a prison sentence for smuggling illegal substances. Until 1996, Jose and his mother lived in the United States, but he violated immigration laws and was facing deportation. His mother, Elsa, however, gained U.S. citizenship, bought a home in Boston, and remained there with her sister. Jose had been married twice before, but kept no contact with his former wives or the children from those marriages. He didn't like talking about his past, keeping his marriages, criminal record, questionable family history, and the mystery surrounding his father's death hidden from others. By the time of the events described here, Jose, who was over 50 years old, owned several properties in Buenos Aires and its suburbs, 3 expensive cars, and dressed in a stylish, luxurious manner. He knew how to present himself in a way that impressed others, exuding an air of sophistication and charm. His charisma quickly won over young Rosanna. They exchanged phone numbers, and within a week, Jose invited her on a date. Their relationship developed so rapidly that Rosanna didn't fully realize how deeply she had fallen for a man who could easily have been her father. The couple began seeing each other secretly, and at first, Rosanna's parents had no idea. She confided in her older sister Monica, who immediately expressed concern, but promised to keep it from their parents for the time being. 6 months later, Jose appeared at the Galliano household to formally ask for Rosanna's hand in marriage. By this time, he was 52 years old, and Rosanna was just 22. Her parents were taken aback by the proposal and didn't know what to say. Rosanna's mother, Graciela, pulled her aside and asked her directly if she was truly planning to marry this much older man. Rosanna hesitated for a moment, but then told her mother that she loved Jose and was ready to marry him. However, Graciela sensed that something wasn't quite right. Her daughter appeared tense, upset, and even scared. It seemed likely that Jose was pressuring Rosanna, pushing her to accept his proposal. Jose, on the other hand, claimed that the 30-year age gap was no obstacle to their love and should not stand in the way of starting a family together. At the end of 2001, just 7 months after meeting, the couple tied the knot and Rosanna moved into Jose's home. First, everything seemed perfect. Jose appeared to genuinely care for and love his young bride. He threw an extravagant wedding celebration, gave Rosanna expensive gifts, and arranged a romantic seaside getaway for their honeymoon. In 2002, Rosanna and Jose welcomed their first child together, a son named Geronimo. However, after the birth of their child, serious problems began to arise within the family. Jose essentially trapped Rosanna in their home, controlling her every move. He monitored all her phone calls, and she was forbidden from interacting not only with friends, but also with her own relatives. At first, Rosanna tried to keep her troubles a secret from her family. She believed she could handle the situation on her own, and hoped the issues in her marriage would resolve. But as time passed, the situation only worsened. Jose revealed himself to be a jealous, manipulative man, a controlling tyrant prone to aggressive behavior. He verbally abused Rosanna, belittled her family, and even claimed that he had picked her out of the trash, implying that she should be grateful for everything he did for her. Rosanna grew increasingly fearful of her husband and tried her best not to upset him. She was willing to sacrifice contact with her parents, brothers, and sister just to avoid provoking Jose, but he didn't need any real excuse to become angry or violent. Over time, the emotional abuse turned physical. Jose began to lash out with his fists almost every day, and it became clear that he enjoyed the power it gave him. Rosanna lived in constant fear, but she didn't know what to do. She naively believed that the problem would eventually fix itself, and her husband would stop tormenting her. But it only got worse. Jose owned several firearms, including 2 handguns that he kept loaded at all times and liked to show off to guests. He frequently threatened Rosanna with these guns, telling her that he would use them if she ever dared to argue with him or try to leave him. One day, her brother Oscar became an unintended witness to such a scene. Oscar had stopped by unexpectedly because he had been unable to reach Rosanna, and he was worried. The front door was unlocked, so he entered, only to find himself in the middle of an intense argument between the couple. Jose was insulting Rosanna and her family, slapped her a few times, and then pulled out a gun. He grabbed her by the hair, held the barrel to her face, and casually talked about how much he would enjoy pulling the trigger. Oscar immediately intervened and stood between his sister and Jose, protecting her. He threatened to call the police and demanded that Rosanna pack her things, take the child, and come with him to their parents' house. Surprisingly, Rosanna refused. She told Oscar that she would stay with her husband and asked him to leave, insisting that he shouldn't interfere in their marital problems. Oscar was stunned but didn't argue further. He quietly left the house, though he wasn't ready to leave just yet. He wanted to make sure that Rosanna was safe and that Jose wouldn't follow through on his violent threats. Oscar waited outside, hidden from view, and took several photos with his phone. While the camera quality of early 2000s phones was far from perfect, the pictures clearly showed Jose holding a gun and pointing it toward his terrified wife sitting on the floor. Oscar left only after Jose had put the weapon away and locked himself in his study. In 2006, despite the ongoing nightmares at home, Rosanna and Jose welcomed their second child, a son named Nguyen. Rosanna did everything in her power to try and mend her relationship with her husband, hoping to keep their marriage intact so that her sons could grow up in a 2-parent household, free from wants. Yet the situation remained unchanged. Jose continued to be as cruel and abusive as ever. Jose had an unusually close relationship with his mother, Elsa, who supported him in every way. Even though Elsa lived in the US, she frequently traveled to Argentina, where she would stay at her son's house for extended visits, sometimes as long as a month or 2. For Rosanna, these visits felt like a constant trial, a humiliating ordeal. She was forced to serve her husband's elderly mother, all while enduring daily insults and criticisms. Elsa believed that Rosanna was a terrible mother, an inadequate wife, and a poor housekeeper. She would often say that Rosanna didn't deserve her son, that she was living in his house, relying on him for everything and amounted to nothing. Elsa had witnessed Jose's violent outbursts against Rosanna on multiple occasions, yet never once intervened. Instead, she blamed Rosanna for provoking him and threatened that if Rosanna ever sought a divorce, she and Jose would take away her sons and make sure she'd never see them again. Even when Elsa wasn't physically present, she made her presence known. She kept constant contact with Jose, asking about everything that happened in the household, offering advice on what to do, and encouraging him to not let Rosanna get away with anything. In mid-2006, when Nguyen was just 7 months old, Jose brutally attacked Rosanna again, breaking her nose and several ribs. This violent assault was the breaking point for Rosanna, and she finally decided to report the abuse to the authorities. She filed a formal complaint of domestic violence and requested a forensic examination, which documented multiple bruises and injuries at various stages of healing, indicating a history of systematic physical abuse. Surprisingly, the case was eventually swept under the rug, and Jose managed to convince Rosanna to give him another chance. She continued to live under the same roof with him, but this time, she started confiding in her sister Monica. Whenever something happened, Rosanna would call Monica to tell her what had occurred, and she even started sending her messages containing the threats she received from both Jose and Elsa. Monica kept a journal of these conversations and documented them for over a year. Rosanna repeatedly fled from her husband's abuse, taking her 2 sons and hiding out at her sister's house for days at a time. According to close family members, Jose would threaten to kill her or take her sons away, forcing her to return to him at least 5 times during these escape attempts. By the end of 2007, Rosanna had filed for divorce and successfully obtained a court order preventing Jose from coming near her and their sons. However, Jose countersued, claiming his right to visit with his sons. The court established a schedule for such visits, which was to be strictly followed. They decided that the meetings would take place at a country house owned by Jose, which was vacant. Rosanna would often attend these meetings with her brother Oscar, as she feared Jose and felt safer with someone who could intervene if things went wrong. Rosanna struck up a friendship with the local gardener, Daniel Gonzalez, and confided in him about her harrowing experiences. Daniel was empathetic and became a witness to several incidents where Jose publicly humiliated Rosanna, using cruel language. He would later testify about these events in court. In August 2007, Rosanna met a young man named Oscar Lugo. Soon, their romantic relationship blossomed. Oscar was just 3 years older than Rosanna, but he was kind, caring, and attentive. He quickly bonded with her sons. It seemed as though she had finally found the perfect partner, and the couple even started planning their wedding to take place once her divorce from Jose was finalized. However, Jose continued to obsessively monitor the life of his still legal wife. He tried to control her, and when threats and physical abuse didn't work, he resorted to bribery. He offered Rosanna a car if she would return to him, but she firmly rejected his offer. Desperate, Jose, who was still in close contact with his mother, confided in her about his plan to kill Rosanna by hiring someone else to do it. Elsa not only supported the idea but also provided financial backing, sending her son a large sum of money to carry out the crime. It took Jose nearly 2 months to find a hitman and devise a detailed plan. On January 16, 2008, Rosanna, her sons, and her sister Monica went to the country house for another scheduled visit with Jose. Jose took the boys out for a walk, leaving the women in the house to wait for their return. Around 9 p.m., Jose sent a message saying that Geronimo, one of the boys, was feeling unwell and had a fever, so he was taking him to the hospital. Rosanna became concerned and sent several text messages to Jose, trying to understand what was going on, but he didn't answer his phone. Around 10 p.m., Jose called Rosanna. The call would turn out to be a deadly trap. He knew that the house had poor cell reception, and he was aware that Rosanna would step outside to catch a signal. As soon as she left the house, Monica heard 6 gunshots and rushed to see what was happening. She saw a dark figure slipping behind a fence on an empty lot next door. Moments later, she found Rosanna lying on the ground, bleeding heavily. Monica ran back into the house to grab her phone, but she was unable to get through to emergency services right away. In a panic, she called her brother, explained the situation, and asked him to immediately contact the police and medical help. Out of the 6 shots fired, 4 hit their target, striking Rosanna in the chest and neck, leaving her with no chance of survival. By the time emergency services arrived, she had already stopped showing signs of life. Rosanna bled out within minutes, and doctors could only confirm her death. None of Rosanna's close family members had any doubt about who was behind this tragic event. Jose was interrogated that same evening, but he feigned genuine surprise and insisted he had no involvement in his wife's death. Since he had an alibi, he was released pending further investigation. Rosanna's relatives decided to bring the case to the media because they feared that without publicity, Jose would simply pay someone off and escape punishment. However, the media attention might have backfired. Jose hired top-tier lawyers and actively gave interviews, tarnishing Rosanna's name and that of her family. He claimed that Rosanna had been unfaithful to him, having numerous lovers, any of whom could have wanted her dead. He even accused Monica of being involved in the murder, arguing that she hadn't helped her dying sister, but instead called their brother. Monica, however, was thoroughly investigated for any possible involvement in the shooting. No traces of gunpowder residue were found on her clothes or hands, and ballistic tests revealed that the shots had been fired from a .45 caliber pistol, something a slender woman like Monica would have struggled to handle. Meanwhile, Jose continued to list Rosanna's supposed lovers, including the gardener and several other men from their household staff. The investigation moved slowly at first, but thanks to the testimonies of numerous witnesses, Monica's detailed diary, and pictures on Oscar's phone, authorities were able to establish that Jose had been abusing his wife for years and had threatened her with physical harm. Further investigations revealed several instances where Roxana had called the police, reporting domestic abuse, with medical evidence supporting her claims. Despite Jose being the primary suspect in his wife's death, the couple's sons remained in his custody, where they were cared for by his mother, Elsa. For nearly 6 months, the Galliano family was prevented from seeing the boys. It wasn't until the fall of 2008 that Graciela and Monica were granted visitation rights, though they were denied custody. Oscar, who had photos on his phone showing Jose aiming a gun at his sister, began receiving anonymous threats, and he was placed under a witness protection program. Authorities attached a tracking device to him to monitor his whereabouts. A few months later, this device saved his life when he was kidnapped by 2 unknown assailants, severely beaten, and left to die in a remote area outside the city. Thanks to the tracking signal, he was located just in time and rushed to the hospital. Jose was arrested a year after Roxana's death and charged with abuse, assault, and orchestrating a planned crime. Despite extensive efforts, the identity of the hired perpetrator was never established. However, Jose's cousins, Paolo and Gabriel, were arrested as potential accomplices. In April 2009, due to lack of evidence, the charges against them were dropped and they were released. The trial for the main suspect was delayed repeatedly, giving rise to suspicions that the case was being intentionally stalled. During this time, it came to light that Elsa, Jose's mother, had transferred a significant sum of money to her son shortly before the tragedy. Allegedly, the funds were meant to purchase a home for Roxana and her sons to live in after the divorce. However, the property was never purchased, and the money disappeared from the account just weeks before the crime. Elsa was also arrested as an accomplice, but both she and her son were released on bail soon after. The trial finally began in the spring of 2013, more than 5 years after Roxana's death. Jose and Elsa were the only defendants, as the identity of the perpetrator remained unknown. Just a week into the trial, Jose suffered a stroke and was hospitalized, while Elsa was placed under house arrest. During this time, Geronimo and Gwyn continued living with the Aris family. 6 months later, the trial resumed, and despite the defense team's best efforts, both Jose and Elsa were found guilty. The primary motive was identified as Jose's unwillingness to divide property and custody of his sons during the divorce. Elsa was at least aware of her son's plans and actively supported him. Throughout the trial, the defendants attempted to tarnish Roxana's reputation, accusing her of numerous affairs, allegations that were ultimately proven false. In November 2013, Jose and Elsa were convicted on all charges and sentenced to life imprisonment. However, by 2015, both had their sentences commuted to house arrest. Elsa due to her advanced age, and Jose following another severe stroke. During this period, Geronimo and Gwyn were placed under the care of Elsa's younger sister. It wasn't until early 2017 that Roxana's family, the Gallianos, secured legal visitation rights with the boys. By then, however, both sons were teenagers who had been estranged from their maternal relatives for years. Their reunions with Roxana's parents, siblings, and extended family were cold and distant, as the boys no longer felt a connection to them. On October 24, 2018, Jose passed away following another stroke, just 1 month shy of his 70th birthday. The following year, Elsa died at the age of 91, reigniting the question of custody. Since Geronimo was just months away from turning 18, he chose to stay with Elsa's sister as he didn't want to change schools or move. Gwyn, however, was placed in the care of his Aunt Monica by court order. Both Geronimo and Gwyn, having endured years of trauma and loss, struggled with chronic depression, anxiety, and other psychological challenges. As Geronimo grew older, he chose to move to another city, severing ties with his maternal relatives, whom he viewed as strangers. Gwyn lived with his Aunt Monica until adulthood, but their relationship remained formal and distant. After finishing high school, he moved into a college dormitory and distanced himself from Monica and other relatives on his mother's side.